Chair, you are good to go.
He's just reconnecting, Devan. We'll just give him a minute. There he is.
Councillor Bernay, you are good to go.
I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of February the 7th, 2022 to order. Good evening. My name is Tony Bernay, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. Roll call. I will ask our Deputy Clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum. Devan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
Present.
Councillor Regima?
Present.
Councillor Russell?
Here.
Councillor Bernay?
Here.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson?
Here.
Councillor Micklick?
Here.
Councillor Timmers?
Here.
Councillor Reimer, I believe, is joining us momentarily. And Councillor Pachoriva will be calling in also shortly. Thank you. We have chair quorum. We have quorum, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically. Chief Administrative Officer Mike Kirkopoulos, Director of Finance, Administration and Innovation Lawrence Wagner, Director of Legislative Services and Town Clerk Julie Kirkelos, the Director of Special Projects Kathleen Dale, Director of Planning and Development Matt Bruder, Manager of Planning and Development Monica Coquiera, Manager of Prudence and Special Projects Melissa Shee, Planner Allison Martin, Director of Community Services Shannon McKay, Director of Economic Development and Communications Paul Deaney, Director of Public Works Dave Graham, Associate Director of Public Works Jillian Harris, Climate Change Coordinator Shannon Fernandez, Legislative Coordinator Deanna Phillips. And moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Manager of Legislative Services, Deputy Clerk Devan Kripp. IT staff are in attendance. Also in attendance, we have Matt Johnson from Urban Solutions, Brandon Petter, Urban Solutions, Ethan Lehman from Upper Canada Consultants, Fernando Puga from DeSantis Homes, Gabriel DeSantis, DeSantis Homes, David Hayworth, Niagara Region, Eric Axe, Niagara Region, Jennifer Haywood, Susan Murphy, Andrew Bowles, Ross Conkright, Eric Fishley, and Joanne Tusella. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and/or deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait 10 minutes to provide the chair to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair, Chair Michalak, will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, please raise the raise hand feature on your video call, and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak. Open it up for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announce the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we will consider confirmation of agenda. We will consider the planning and the development consent agenda after considering the delegations and the reports. Do any members have any objections to this change? Seeing none, we have statutory public meetings. We have 2 statutory public meetings this evening. The purpose of the 2 public meetings is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lehman of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Henley Heights Construction, Inc. for 3185 Tintern Road, and the other being the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications for garden suites by the town of Lincoln. We will consider the staff report associated with each item immediately after each statutory public meeting. Section 1715 and 3412 of the Planning Act requires that before adopting an official plan amendment and before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must ensure that sufficient and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. If a person or public body does not make any oral submissions at a public meeting, make written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the amendments are approved, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the town of Lincoln to the Ontario Land Tribunal, OLT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report, published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and or the minutes of the public meeting, and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council decisions. It may be used to serve notice of an Ontario Land Tribunal, an OLT hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of the information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our first public meeting is for the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lehman of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Henley Heights Construction, Inc. for 3185 Tintern Road, PD 04-22.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry for the interruption. I'm not sure whether you were at the table when Mr. Tom Richardson, who's with the law firm, the legal firm of Sullivan Manning, came in, and he is here this evening as well. And it is my understanding that it is this item 5.1 that he is available for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have 2 individuals that I have on my agenda, on my script, that have requested to be included in this public hearing. Please note, delegations may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once we have received the delegation, committee will transition directly into the report and the motion. Our first delegation for this item is Ethan Lehman of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Henley Heights Construction for 3185 Tintern Road. Ethan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. I'm joined here by Tim, a property owner, as well as Craig Rose, senior planner at Upper Canada Consultants. I'm just going to share my screen for a second. I have a short presentation I'd like to give.
Actually, we will,
Oh, sorry. Did you want to share?
please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So good evening. As I mentioned, my name is Ethan Lamont, junior planner at Upper Canada Consultants. I'm going to be giving a few short slides to provide just a bit of an overview of the application. So here's an aerial image of the subject property. The address is 3185 Tintern Road. The property itself is very large. It's approximately 92 acres or 37.3 hectares in size. It has frontage on both Tintern Road and Spring Creek Road. It currently does not contain any structures. And as you can see in the top part of the property, the 20 Mile Creek traverses the property as well. As you can see in the image, approximately 3.3 acres of the property along Spring Creek Road and 1.5 acres of the property on Tintern Road are within the Tintern Hamlet settlement boundary, which is shown in black on this image. From a land use planning perspective, settlement areas are areas delineated by the province that are intended for growth and development. Regional and town of Lincoln official plans direct that limited compatible development is to occur specifically within the Tintern Hamlet boundary. So the property outside of the Tintern Hamlet is considered prime agricultural, and the area around the 20 Mile Creek is environmental lands. No development or site alteration is proposed in these areas. So as I mentioned, the owner is seeking to create 5 lots within the portion of the property that's within the Tintern settlement boundary. 1 fronting onto Tintern Road and 4 fronting onto Spring Creek Road. In order to verify the exact location of the Tintern Hamlet, we were able to obtain a geodetic shapefile from the Niagara region, which we inserted into our drawings that we submitted with the application. So that's just to make sure that the lots are entirely contained within the Tintern settlement boundary. The remaining 34.72 hectares or 86 acres of land outside of this settlement area will be retained for continued agricultural use, as no development is permitted to take place on this area of the property. The development also occurs a considerable distance from the 20 Mile Creek, and there's no impact on these environmental areas. The proposed lot in Tintern Road, shown as parcel 2 in the sketch, is about 1.5 acres in size and has about 119 meters or 390 feet of frontage. The lots in Spring Creek Road, shown as parcels 3 through 6, are all about 1 acre in area and have lot frontages between 35 and 39 meters or 115 to 128 feet. The submitted zoning bylaw amendment seeks to apply the Hamlet residential zoning onto the area of the property within the Tintern settlement area, which is consistent with the zoning of the other residential properties in the Hamlet. The remaining area of the property will maintain the agricultural and environmental zones in effect there. Site-specific lot frontage and lot area provisions are requested for the lots on Spring Creek Road. So specifically, a minimum lot area of 4,000 square meters or 1 acre is proposed, and a minimum lot frontage of 35 meters or 115 feet is requested. And the lot on Tintern Road meets all of the currently applicable zoning regulations. So no site-specific relief is required for that one. And I will also note that the town is in the process of updating their zoning bylaw. And under the new zoning bylaw, the minimum lot area of 4,000 meters is the minimum required lot size in the Hamlet residential zone. So we've gone through a few studies and reports to support the application. A hydrogeological study, an archaeological assessment, and preliminary lot grading plan. The hydrogeological assessment is a requirement under the regional official plan to justify a reduction in lot size up to a minimum of 1 acre. The hydrogeological assessment confirms that the proposed lots can support private servicing requirements for the long term. It recommends the provision of cisterns for water supply to ensure that the proposed development doesn't impact groundwater quality and quantity for adjacent properties that are serviced with wells. An archaeological assessment of the property was also undertaken and no archaeological resources were encountered. And lastly, a preliminary grading plan was prepared to show that the proposed lots can be graded and residentially developed without negatively impacting neighboring properties. And these grading plans showed conceptual building and septic locations, which are subject to further refinement. Also, as part of our planning exercise, we undertook a neighborhood lot analysis to see how the proposed lots fit into Tintern's existing lot fabric. In this slide, you can see the existing lot fabric in orange, and the proposed lots in the red dashed line, and the hamlet boundary is shown in that purple line. Through the analysis, we found that a majority of the residential lots in Tintern don't meet current zoning standards for the hamlet residential zone. And the character of the area is more compact than what the zoning bylaw would provide for. Along Spring Creek, many of the properties have frontages within the 98 to 150 foot range or 30 to 35 meter range, which is consistent with the lot frontages that we're proposing on Spring Creek Road. We also found that a significant number of the existing lots within the hamlet don't meet the 1 acre or 4,000 square meter minimum lot requirement under the regional official plan for lots on private services. And the proposed lots are actually larger than the average residential lot in Tintern. So based on the analysis, we find that the proposed lots maintain the existing residential character of Tintern. So to summarize, provincial, regional, and local land use planning documents direct that limited and compatible growth and development is to occur within the Tintern settlement area. The submitted zoning bylaw amendment will facilitate appropriate residential lot creation within the portion of the property within the Tintern settlement area as envisioned in these documents. The areas outside of the settlement boundary will be retained for continued agricultural and environmental uses. As demonstrated in the streetscape study, the proposed lots are consistent with the existing residential lots in Tintern and maintain the residential character of the hamlet. And with regard to the requested reduction in lot area for the properties on Spring Creek Road, a hydrogeological study has been completed in accordance with regional policy, which confirms that the lots can adequately accommodate private septic requirements for the long term, and the lots can be appropriately residentially developed as intended. So that concludes my presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Oh, you're on mute, Chair.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Ethan. Are there any clarifying questions to the delegate committee?
I'm seeing none, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Our next delegation is Chris Short. Chris, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I mean, as a resident, we don't get involved in these types of things too often until it comes into your neighborhood, right? I did express through an email to the town, and I guess I just want to expand on that. And I felt more so the need after some letters that were received in my mail from other concerned residents, but also a hand-delivered solicitor letter. So, you know, you referenced the purpose of this public meeting, Tony, and it's to kind of hear from the public. So that's why I'm here to further, speak my points and concerns and whatnot. But I'll move on here. So I recently moved to this area, like rural community, having previously lived in Beamsville. Grew up on a tender fruit farm in Vineland, and absolutely have a love for farmland, the country, just what this community offers, right? So naturally, when it was brought to my attention through a neighbor that this proposed development was happening with the rest of the hamlet potentially being developed long term, I'm going to take the opportunity to speak up and be heard, and hopefully that doesn't fall on deaf ears. In any case, it leads me to expand on some of the concerns that I had. Prime agriculture land was referenced. I have a love for it, having much of my family well-being was from farming, right? So seeing that that's converted to residential houses, I have concerns about it. Lincoln is trying to be a center of agriculture excellence, and here we are often doing developments like this, converting agriculture land to residential. As much as it is within the hamlet, I understand that defense from the applicant, but it's more, a concern of what's to come and the precedents that it sets for others to expect or do the same. The conservation land, I've come to love. The 20 Mile Creek runs directly behind my property. It's adjacent from these 4 on Spring Creek. The number of wildlife that I see on my property, it's unreal. There are so many various types of animals that are traveling through this area along the creek, along the conservation land, which also passes through this property. And I would argue you can go there yourself to these proposed 4 lots, and I guarantee you'll see tracks from various animals through the snow where these 4 lots and others will be developed. So I would just consider the impact that you're having to the wildlife, to the local farm animals, increased vehicle traffic, and what that does, to this area that we've grown to love. Not to mention it is a cycling route. Every day in the summer, there's multiple cyclists coming up and down this road. It's great to see. It's a place where people escape the city to get some good mental health relief and whatnot, and some exercise. By adding more houses, more car traffic, it's just changing the landscape of what we all love. And I also am an avid cyclist myself. So I just kind of question, as you consider these things, Council, how you want Lincoln to look long term, what precedence is set when you do, allow these types of developments. What will happen to the remaining hamlet in this small town of Tintern. I hope that it doesn't, we stop here. If it is that we develop this hamlet, I hope, you stand strong to that, no further development. But when we do development as a community member, you do expect some benefits of it. And I sit here, yes, 4 or 5 homes, whatever ends up being, not a big deal, but you add 20 plus or whatever the number may be, you start to demand some other services, municipal services, water, gas, increased infrastructure, internet services. We don't have any of that here in Tintern. And, similar to Camden, as you started making those changes, and even Painesville, you got those benefits that development brings. So, that's just one thing. Like, why are we doing it? Why are we taking this agriculture land and changing it to residential? And from a community member, we're not seeing any benefit from it. So, as you kind of think of what you envision Lincoln to be, just kind of, I guess, ask yourself what makes it unique and what we're trying to achieve. And I do understand that there is a need for housing, and I'm not argumenting that, but why don't we stick to the areas where we have planned development for the area? That's about it. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Chair, you're on mute. Oh, you're on mute. Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I hit the button like 3 times. Thank you, Chris. Are there any clarifying questions to the delegate from committee members? Seeing none, Deputy Clerk?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for delegating. In addition to the 2 delegations, we have received written correspondence from Craig and Kathy Priest, dated February the 6th, 2022. There being no further information for consideration to this item, I now declare this public meeting to address the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Henley Heights Construction, Inc. for 3185 Tintern Road adjourned. I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers that Councillor receive for information report PD 04-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Henley Heights Construction, Inc. and that a recommendation report.
Chair, I'm sorry, we need to receive the delegations first prior to the report recommendation.
Okay.
Do you mind if I read it ahead?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Deputy Clerk.
So it's that council receive and file as information the following delegation and written correspondence regarding item 5.1 zoning bylaw amendment in Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants for 3185 Tintern Road. Ethan Lamont, Chris Short, and Kathy proceed. And with that, I will call the vote. Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson,
Yes.
Counselor Micklick,
Yes.
Counselor Reimer,
Yes.
Counselor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. Chair, you may now go into the recommendation report motion.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. So we will move directly into report PD-0422 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants for 3185 Tintern Road. Do members of council have any questions? I'm seeing Councillor Mikulak. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bernay. Through you to staff. It's been identified that the speed limit is 70 kilometers through that hour. I'm not sure if this is accurate. And should this pass, is there a possibility of reducing that speed limit to perhaps a more hamlet sort of like a 50 zone?
You directing that to Director Graham?
Or Mr. Bruder or Director Graham, just in terms of the safety concerns that some of the residents have brought forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to make a few comments on that. Thanks for the question, Councillor Mikulak. We'd be happy to take a look at the speed limits in the area, as you've suggested, to see if anything should be changed. And, we could look at doing some speed monitoring to see what's happening in that area. So that's something we can investigate further.
That'd be terrific. And if I may, Chair Bernay, one more question. Without knowing, without living in Tintern myself, is there a certain character to the village or hamlet itself that we should be aware of that might impact the types or sorts of houses that are built in that neighborhood that would maintain its character?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could take that one.
Thank you, Director.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question, Councillor. I think there is definitely a certain character. You typically do have lots that are a little bit larger, as is reflected in some of our provisions, largely because too, as the delegation indicated, there's no opportunity for servicing. Everything has to be on private services. So we want to make sure that the lots are big enough to do that. But in terms of the built form, I think there are different types of housing, but it's all single detached, whether it's 2-story or bungalows. I think generally, typically a little bit larger setbacks, our front yard setbacks, for example, in that area are 15 meters. There's no relief being sought for any of those specific ones. The only relief that would be sought through this would be for the lot area and the frontage, just the width of some of the lots, which you heard from the earlier delegation, isn't all that far off from a lot of the other lots in there. So those are the comments I would make, just generally on a high level about the character in the area. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Mikulak, satisfied?
Thank you very much.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Bernay. I've received a few letters from residents in turn, and thanks for reaching out to me. From what I understood, Councillor Mikulak just brought up the number one concern is the speed on the corner. However, there is a brand new church just beside the development as well. So I'm sure there's a lot of traffic in and out of that church. So I also would think that we should definitely look at that speed moving forward and lowering it if possible to make it safer for everyone, for all the bicycling and pedestrians and whoever's on that area. The other concern I heard as well was, and if it would affect the neighboring wells. Many of the residents do have wells, and they do have a concern that perhaps their wells could somehow be affected. So I'm not sure who would like to answer, Director Bruder or.
Yeah, sure. Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. Good question as well. And one of the reasons why a requirement's in there for the hydrogeological study to make sure that there are no impacts That's something we can elaborate a little bit further on when we come back for a recommendation. But my understanding is at this time, all the investigations that were undertaken didn't identify the potential for any impacts to adjacent wells. But like I said, we can provide some more clarifying information to that effect in the subsequent recommendation report.
Thank you, Director Bruder. And just to follow up, with the new, we heard the applicant say that the new houses would have cisterns. Would there be some kind of an agreement that they would only have cisterns, or could they possibly drill wells?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, there is potential for wells to be drilled, but at this time, I think the idea or the way forward was to go with cisterns. But again, that's something we can further evaluate. But as of right now, I didn't know if there was the potential for one versus the other. I think both could be potential options.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. And Chair Brune, I just have one more question, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
I also had a concern from a neighbor who's would be adjacent to part 2, and perhaps this would be to the consultants. He is saying that his septic tank is on the part 2 boundary line, or perhaps on part 2. I'm just wondering if you have any information on that and how that would be addressed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the question. So that's certainly something that we've been made aware of. Our understanding is that there was some staking that was done to guide the archaeological assessment. That stake might not have been placed exactly where the property line was. So we can certainly verify with the surveyor exactly where the lot boundaries will be. But our understanding is that the neighbor's septic system is located entirely on their property. It was just a misunderstanding with regard to an approximate location of a stake.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chair Brune.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Thank you, Mr. Lamont, for that clarification. Next up, I have Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, the Councillor Reimer is actually next. I moved my position so that he could speak first. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Reimer, looking very relaxed tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Brune. Couple of questions specifically to the lot sizes through you, Chair, to Director Brewer, please. They mentioned the presenters mentioned they've done a hydro-G study on this particular lot. However, we don't have an idea of what the house sizes are yet. That's quite a major factor in designing on-site septic systems. Do we have anything in place as far as maximum sizing with relationship to that? Again, only because it relates to they're asking for relief in the size of the lot.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a good question, Councillor, and that's one of the things that's governed a little bit by our zoning bylaw, which establishes the building envelope. It talks about what the setbacks are for the property, the front yard being 15 and the side yards as well, but also there's a maximum lot coverage of 15% in Hamlet residential for single detached dwellings, so that would be a governing factor as well in order to kind of establish the footprint and identify the appropriate scale of it.
Thank you, Director. Just to follow up, if I may, Chair Brune.
Absolutely.
The living space, though, Director Bruder, on that, we don't have an idea of how many square feet living space is going to be. So setbacks and building envelope only address part of that picture. So square footage of the buildings, I'm assuming we're not going to be proposing 1,100 square foot bungalows here. There's going to be substantially sized houses on there. And if we are still looking at a spare as well, are we looking at designing something to accommodate the house that's being built and also a spare septic size? So you use up quite a bit of lot in a hurry in that kind of setting. So I'm not sure what the little fuller picture for that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's another good question. With respect to the size of the property, that's why one of the regional requirements, and I say regional because, as you're likely aware, Niagara Region is responsible for issuance of approvals of septic systems. And they identify that minimum threshold of 0.4 hectares or an acre size lot 4,000 square meters, just to make sure that there is enough room for a septic system to be installed. I think that would have to be something that's factored into the building design as well, as they have to make sure there's adequate area for the septic bed, just because, you know, that in by itself would kind of limit a little bit on where the house is on the site, in addition to the setbacks and how much it can cover, because the only option is for it to be privately serviced. So they would have to, whoever's building the dwellings in the future would have to make sure they set appropriate land aside, or else, you know, servicing would be a problem and it would be counterintuitive from a building standpoint.
One more follow-up, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor.
With regards to that, we would be not placing any requirements then on this. We leave that totally up to the region on this to accommodate that or to make provisions for that, or would we be asking for something related to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's why we've included the regional input in terms of the minimum size within our applicable planning documents, to make sure that we provide appropriate latitude so that that can be considered. So we've already kind of involved the region as we've gone through and established the zoning and official plan parameters for that hamlet residential area. So by virtue of that, we've kind of gone through that process already a little bit, and then it would get further figured out during the actual design, during the building permit stage as well.
Thank you, Director Bruder. Thank you, Chair Brunet.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I felt the question that I believe it was Councillor Mikulik asked regarding, you know, the general culture in Tintern was really a good one. And maybe, although it's not part of the planning process, I don't believe, it would be a good idea for us to consult the Heritage Committee and also the Lincoln Archives. Possibly somebody could put together a few lines. I know a little bit about Tintern. It has one of the richest histories in the area. I think it would be, it would bring a heart and a soul to what's being asked here. And I think when the neighbors talk about what they're trying to retain, that also may provide a little bit of background information. So, Mr. Chairman, through you, I would ask Mr. Bruder or Mr. Prokopoulos, even though it's not part of the official process, if we could arrange to have a report such as that as an addendum. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just from a clarifying standpoint, or like an addendum report, just to focus on just kind of the heritage environment or climate, let's say within Tintern itself, just to make sure that whatever future buildings are going in would fit in, just because, like was earlier mentioned, at this point there are no buildings yet being proposed. It's just figuring out the lot fabric. So I just want to make sure we're clear. That's all, your worship.
That's all. It's just really, it can be a background, or it can be, you know, just something as simple as that. There's been quite a few books written on the area. I just think it would be useful for all of council to have more information.
That's something I can certainly take away through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruder. Mr. Bruder, Mayor Easton, any other questions? Deputy Mayor and Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a question of clarification, and it's around the zoning. And I believe this is the first zoning application that I certainly have been involved in the Tintern hamlet. And through you, maybe to Mr. Bruder, if he could just clarify. So the zoning being agricultural currently, and it falls within the Tintern hamlet. Is that similar to an agricultural zoning falling within an urban boundary? And I assume it is. I see you shaking your head. So follow up to that. So when assessing the change of zoning, we would consider the agricultural use and whether or not this is prime agricultural property. Would that come into play, Mr. Bruder?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It would. In this case, what we're looking at here is, you're right, we're looking at lands that, although right now they're zoned agricultural, zoning being from 1993, they are located within kind of a settlement area. So what we would look at is, the pieces within the settlement area, if they were to be removed, that remnant parcel that will remain agricultural, does it impact the viability? We have a minimum parcel size for agricultural lands out here, 16.2 hectares. This one well exceeds that even after these lots would be severed off. So from a viability standpoint, as it pertains to agriculture, we would consider that to be maintained, just because by virtue of the settlement boundary, these lots were or could be at any time used for that hamlet residential purpose. So like I say, in staff's opinion, this would be that the viability of the remnant agricultural parcel is still maintained.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if I got my question across. It's more to the question of the 5 lots, not the rest of the property. And do those 5 lots fall under an assessment of whether they are prime agricultural property or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, since they're within the settlement area boundary, we wouldn't be looking at them under the same lens as we would that other piece. They would be considered more for residential purposes, hamlet residential, that is. So only single detached dwelling lots. We wouldn't be looking at any other land uses for them. All right, does that answer your question better?
That does. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Deputy Clerk, are you seeing any other hands? I'm not seeing any.
I see no further hands, Chair.
Thank you. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer. The council received the information report PD-04-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Henley Heights Construction, Inc., and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Regina?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Devon. Thank you. And I now declare this public meeting to address the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants, Inc. for 3185 Tintern Road adjourned. Our second public meeting is for the purpose of the official plan and the zoning bylaw amendment applications for garden suites by the town of Lincoln. We do not have any individuals that have requested to be included in the public meeting or registered delegates. We do have Monica Coquiera here to answer any questions. Do any committee members have any questions for Monica? I'm seeing Deputy Mayor, Councillor McPherson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Monica. So good report, and just a question with regards to the proposed bylaw, the draft bylaw, and under temporary garden suites 6.33, item number F. And in item number F, it calls out that the gross floor area of the garden suite shall be included in the calculation of maximum lot coverage and shall not exceed 140 square meters or 50% of the ground floor area of the principal dwelling. And I'm wondering if we should not have a whichever is less in that part of the bylaw. I'm just thinking that if you had a ground floor area, I understand that 140 square meters is roughly 1,500 square feet. If you had a main residence that is in excess of that number, does the owner choose a ground floor area greater than 100 or than 1,500 square feet?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. That is a good point, and we can look into adding that. Definitely, if the ground floor area of the principal dwelling is greater than 50%, then yeah, we wouldn't want the garden suite to exceed 140 square meters or 1,500 square feet. So I think that's a good idea. We can add whichever is less. So I've made note of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Mikulak.
Thank you, Chair Bernay. Through you, just a point of clarification. Like what that's under item F 6.33 F regarding the gross floor area of the garden suite. I read that to believe that it would be 140 square meters or 50% of the existing residence on that property. So let's say, for example, if their existing property was 3,000 square feet, the accessory or the garden suite could maximum 1,500 square feet or so. Am I correct in thinking that? Or if we're using meters, 280 meters as opposed, would the existing home would have to be 280 meters.
I think, so through you, Chair, if as you mentioned, if the principal dwelling is a large dwelling, I think saying whichever is less would be clearer, is a clearer policy. So in that case, if the principal dwelling is 10,000 square feet, then the garden suite still cannot be larger than 1,500 square feet.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so currently, and I'm reading this correctly, that if there's a residence that's 280 meters, the largest it can be is 140 meters. If the residence is, say, 200 meters, the largest it can be is 100 meters.
Correct.
Okay,
whichever is less, we'll add that in there.
Thank you very much for that.
No other questions, Councillor Mikulak? I'm not seeing any other questions. Deputy Clerk?
You are correct, Chair.
As there are no speakers or other information for consideration to this item, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rinjaman that Council receive and file for information Report PD-07-22 regarding the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment applications PLOPA 202-10193 and PLZ BA 202-10194, and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Regima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Mikulak?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. I now declare this public meeting to address the official plan and the zoning bylaw amendments applications for garden suites by the town of Lincoln adjourned. We have now concluded the statutory public meeting section of the agenda, and we will now continue with the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. 6.1 delegations. We are now at the portion of the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda whereby we have a presentation and a list of delegations. And we have a presentation by David Hayworth, the official plan policy consultant for the Niagara region, regarding the Niagara region's official plan update. David, you have 10 minutes for your presentation. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much and good evening. If you could put the presentation up. Thank you. Good evening, Chair, Mayor, council members, staff, and the public. I am pleased to speak to you about the release of the consolidated draft Niagara official plan for review and comment. This is an important milestone in the development of the official plan, as it represents the first occasion where there is a complete consolidation of the policy document to be reviewed in its entirety to see how the pieces fit together. This evening, I will update you on the official plan in general, with a focus on growth management and intensification as it pertains to the town of Lincoln. Next slide. So there are various key interest areas of the Niagara official plan that we want to address in managing growth, namely improving our natural environment system mapping and policies, having a response to climate change, creating a diverse mix of housing and a greater supply of housing. We know that we need to increase the amount of housing of all types, particularly medium and higher density, to help address affordable housing. Improve our economic competitiveness by protecting key employment areas, and improve the clarity and the streamlining of our two-tier planning system with clear, interpretable policies. Next slide. So it's very important that the region provide a consistent set of growth numbers for transportation, water, wastewater planning, and development charges to plan for growth and ensure people can travel to and from work, that there's servicing to accommodate the growth, and that growth can pay for growth. Next slide. In the simplest sense, the Niagara official plan establishes policy to identify what we will protect, how and where we grow, and the policy systems or tools to achieve these. Next slide. There is significant growth coming to Niagara over the next 30 years. We will grow by approximately 200,000 people and 85,000 jobs compared to 2021. Next slide. So drilling down to focus on the town of Lincoln now, as you can see, the town is the third municipality from the top in these two charts. So we show what the population and employment targets will be, what we expect in terms of what the growth will be at 2051 in terms of population employment. And then on the right, what the intensification target is for Lincoln, and you can see that at 90%. And that's because Lincoln can't grow out because of the Greenbelt plan, and specialty crop does not allow expansions expansions into specialty crop areas. So Lincoln has to intensify from within. Next slide. So it's important to note that the region, from a regional scale, growth is being strategically directed to specific areas over the long term. And we expect that these strategic areas can accommodate about 30% of the growth anticipated. And what we've done is develop strategic growth areas. And we have the Urban Growth Center in downtown St. Catharines, district plan areas, which are the Brock and Glendale district plan areas. And then the major transit station areas in green. And Lincoln, of course, has the Future Go transit station area. And then regional growth centers, which are downtown Niagara Falls and downtown Welland. So these are areas where we want to direct a significant amount of growth from a regional scale perspective. Next slide. So going back to the town of Lincoln specifically, I think Lincoln's done a very proactive job in trying to get ahead of the growth that's coming and plan for the growth accordingly. The Prudhomme secondary plan is a great example, and you can see the range of growth that the plan has, the development of the plan has tried to accommodate in terms of residents and jobs. And then with the Beamsville GO transit station area, you can also see the secondary plan, the amount of new residents and jobs that that plan can accommodate over the long term. Next slide. From a regional perspective, we're dealing with 12 municipalities, and all the municipalities have a different challenge in terms of accommodating intensification. So from a regional perspective, we've tried to provide opportunities for the integration of gentle density and a mix and range of housing options that considers the character of existing residential neighborhoods. And also, we've tried to provide the flexibility to local municipalities to plan for their intensification targets throughout their built-up areas as they see fit. They can determine where their intensification should go. From a local perspective, we just are looking for the overall targets to be achieved. But the flexibility is there through intensification strategies and other strategies I'll talk about. Next slide. And some of these other strategies are district and secondary plans that I mentioned, and Lincoln's already taken a fairly proactive approach towards that. Urban design, and I'll speak to that in a minute. Infrastructure policies in terms of policies that make sure that the transportation and water, wastewater systems and services will support where growth will be, and the coordination of those elements in terms of transportation, water and wastewater services. Next slide. So one of the examples in drilling back down to focus on the town of Lincoln is the Ontario Street Urban Design Vision and Streetscape Master Plan. This is an example of the region working in collaboration with the town of Lincoln on a project which is going to take best practices in urban design, consider higher density residential development, office and commercial employment uses, and transit orientated design and complete community approach. So it's a very comprehensive approach to, again, planning for greater intensification on a more comprehensive, well-planned scale. Next slide. So in terms of considering growth, we have to consider the impacts of our changing climate. The Niagara official plan has integrated land use planning response to addressing climate change policies related to strategic growth, intensification targets, planning for complete communities, natural heritage protection, efficient transportation and transit, infrastructure sustainability, and these are all key approaches to addressing climate change. The plan also identifies future work to be done, such as a greening strategy, climate modeling, and adaptation strategy. Next slide. As we plan to accommodate growth over the next 30 years, the policy direction in this official plan aspires to provide for affordable housing opportunities, climate change adaptation mitigation, efficient use of infrastructure, investment in public amenities, protection of our natural and rural systems, and support for economic development. Next slide. This is a slide showing the timelines for the official plan. We released a consolidated draft at the end of the year. We've been getting comments on that till the beginning of March. We will be having some consultation sessions, which I'll be speaking about. We look to have a formal public meeting around the end of April, and then take a report to council probably beginning of June, around June, for a recommendation for adoption of the plan in order to meet the timelines of getting it to the province for July of 2022. Next slide. So these are some of the public information sessions that we have held on January 26th. We held a session on settlement area boundary expansions. As you've probably heard, we are proposing some settlement area boundary expansions to meet community need in West Lincoln and Fort Erie and Niagara Falls, as well as small expansions in Pelham and Thorold where those municipalities meet. So we've been getting public input on that. We're holding a public information session on February 10th on the natural environment system. And we've been getting feedback on the mapping and policies to date. And then on February 24th, we'll be holding a public session on the official.
Reading this letter, a couple problems.
Okay, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you much, David. You did a really good job there trying to keep it within 10 minutes, but it is a very important topic and we thank you for the report. Are there any questions from committee for Mr. Hayworth? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Hayworth. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just want to get a little more input or maybe clarification on something you said in that presentation. I don't want to paraphrase, but I'll have to because I don't know the exact quote, but you mentioned that the region gives the municipalities the authority to work within their secondary plans or their official plans as long as they hit their minimum intensification targets. Is that right?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, we have an overall target. You have the flexibility to determine where that intensification should go. You also have the flexibility to go beyond the minimums in order to address your growth needs as it comes in. We recognize that, you know, this is an overall target. Certain properties might be very suitable for higher intensification than an overall general target, and certain properties may not be as suitable. And you want to look at aspects of, you know, infrastructure, servicing, capacity, the kind of orientation of the building and massing relative to what's in the area, urban design, etc. So, you know, often the planning approach is, you know, more comprehensive and at a bit of a higher level at first with secondary plans, the Ontario Street urban design project that you're working on, intensification strategies, and then it can go down and be looked at a property by property basis as well. But there's nothing that prevents a municipality from going beyond the targets, but we also wanted to provide, of course, the flexibility for the local municipalities to put that intensification where they see best.
Okay. Thank you. And follow up, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Through you back to Ms. Hayworth. So again, taking all that in, would it be fair to say, though, that the region would respect the secondary plans that are in place as long as they do meet the intensification targets, whatever is proposed within those secondary plans?
Through the chair to the councillor, in general, yes, I think we would want to, as the official plan gets approved, take a look at those with the town and see if there's any updates that it would be necessary to meet the overall intent of the official plan. But without saying that and looking into it in greater detail, generally, yes, you know, if you're meeting all the basic policy requirements. The secondary planning that you've done has been very proactive. And if there's something required, it's probably just updating.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Mikulak.
Thank you very much, Chair Bernay. Through you to Mr. Hayworth. Thank you very much for coming and taking this challenging project on. Just question with regards to intensification, and certainly the town of Lincoln is restricted or constricted with where we can grow and the need for intensification. But what I'm curious about is when looking at properties within our secondary plans or master plans, what sort of considerations should we give when rezoning mid to high density properties to, say, fire halls, churches, or schools of that nature?
Through the chair to the councillor, I think in general, depending on the aspect and the intensification, it's really a local planning matter. But I think in general, you want intensification where you're close to public transit, especially if it's more intensification for affordable housing. Where there's amenities, where there's open space and parkland as well. From a general perspective in terms of planning at a secondary plan level, active transportation linkages, the infrastructure and servicing capacity. There's a variety of factors that you would consider in kind of strategically locating the intensification from a secondary plan level. But beyond that, at a local level, the region would not really get involved in the specific densities on an individual property per se, as well as building heights or anything of that nature. That'd be more of a local issue.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Ringe, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bernay. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Hayworth. My question has to do with an application that's coming up tonight for Ontario Street at Green Lane Road. And we've had questions from people in the community about whether there's any plans on the region's part to do upgrades to that area of Ontario Street for the overpass. I'm wondering if any of the transportation schedules or anything that the region's included with this official plan update and anticipates upgrades again to that area of Ontario Street.
Through the chair to the councillor, I'm not privy to the details of the application you're speaking of. I'd have to go in and check into that.
Okay. Well, I can tell you it's an proposed apartment building at the northeast corner of Ontario and Green Lane. So the questions are, will the overpass be upgraded over the train tracks? So if you have to look into that and let me know, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Hayworth, for being here this evening and presenting this overview. It's very important. I want to make absolutely certain that there isn't any confusion about the subject matter around our growth numbers. So we have growth numbers for Lincoln. All of Niagara has their growth numbers up to 2051. We know the town of Lincoln is in a situation where 67% of its land is in the Greenbelt. Agreed?
Through the chair to the mayor, I'm not sure of the percentage, but certainly you're constrained by the Greenbelt plan in terms of expansions.
Okay, so when we see that number, and we know that we have to meet the number without going outside of the urban boundaries, And we also develop a secondary plan, and or in this case, we're talking about a secondary plan, but it could very well be a master plan for a particular street where we want to see more commercial development. So the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we have to meet these numbers. They're way off, but we still have to meet the numbers. And therefore, one of the things that we look at is how that's going to affect our future decisions in terms of boundary adjustments. And we know that some of our neighbors, some of our colleagues at the region are looking at boundary adjustments. And they also have a smaller percentage of land that is going to be developed where they're going to put growth because they don't have the constraints that we do. And that is a fact, correct?
Through the chair to the mayor, yes, that's generally correct. Yep.
Okay. So when we start to discuss issues of intensity, the region is really, you're not interested in the detail of that. You're interested in whether we meet those growth targets overall.
Through the chair to the mayor, yeah, in a sense, obviously, we want to participate with you in good community planning and the development of complete communities. But a lot of that planning is done at the local level, and we want to be there to assist you. We want overall targets to be met. We want to provide the flexibility to the local municipalities as to their detailed planning on how they want to achieve that. You know, for a secondary plan, we are the approval authority for the secondary plan. So we play a role. We can delegate that authority if there's regional and provincial interests are being addressed early on through consultation, et cetera. But we are the approval authority for those. So we do play a role, and we do want to see the overall planning meeting those targets. But those secondary plans are local plan amendments and driven by the local municipalities. But consider it, in a sense, a collaborative partnership in trying to work together to achieve good planning. And I kind of think the Prudhomme secondary plan is an example of that kind of collaboration.
All right, so the town makes a decision that when the town is conscious of the fact that it has really quite a significant limitation because of the green belt, and we decide that we have an opportunity to increase the intensity within a building that's away from, that's in a spot that we consider to be more ideal than in the center of town. Let's just leave it at that. That's considered, the region looks at that as a local decision, and that based on our track record of making decisions and considering all things and our local circumstances, that's you wouldn't be looking at us askance and saying, why are you doing that? Or you could have done a better job. That's not your role, correct?
Through the chair to the mayor, that's correct. I mean, we want to see, you know, overall intensification targets. That's what you're striving for and attempting to meet. We don't want to get involved in planning on a site-specific property basis. That's for the local municipality to deal with. I think, you know, if it was a site-specific property along a regional road and, you know, the ingress and egress is onto a regional road and services maybe or something like that, of course, we would be even more involved at that point in time. But in generally speaking, it's the local municipality to determine on a individual property basis what's appropriate intensification. And as I mentioned, there's nothing to stop the municipality from going beyond minimum requirements.
Right, I appreciate that very much. And we certainly have consulted on the secondary plan, and I like your reference to the close to public transit, the amenities, the service capacity. That certainly has been the subject of a great deal of discussion in this particular case. Thank you very much. I think it's very important to have actual, you know, something that you're actually seeing is coming alive in the community, to be able to define how those relationships work on whenever we need to come together on a topic. Thank you very much, Mr. Hayworth. I appreciate your input.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, back to Mr. Hayworth. Just want to clarify something that the mayor had said about the fact that we as a municipality have to hit our intensification targets. Could you just give me and those watching some insight into what happens if we don't?
Through the chair to the councillor, I mean, they're targets that you're supposed to plan for. You know, the development that like you can put the plans in place. The development that happens, you would hope meets those targets, and you actually have that development come into play. I will say this, based on what I've been hearing around the development that's coming in terms of plans for Niagara and across other regions, is that developments that are coming in that are being proposed are exceeding the planned intensification targets for the most part. So I'm not anticipating that to probably be too much of an issue based on the planning that is being planned for.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, follow-up through you.
Councillor Russell, go ahead.
So with that being said, so obviously there's no detriment to us if we fall 50 people short of what our target is, or there's no benefit if we go 1,000 people over. Basically, we're doing our best to try to hit numbers that are coming at us through the province, through the region, back to us as an ideal target. But with that being said, again, since you are the approver of our secondary plans, we would hope that those plans that we have in place meet the needs of what that growth targets are going to be. And that, again, as you said, it's left up to the municipality to determine whether or not we're going to hit those targets. And also, as you seem to indicate, it seems likely that based on what developments are coming in across the region and across Lincoln, that won't be an issue, correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, you know, the objective is that you're planning to achieve the targets, right? You're doing your planning to achieve the targets. What growth actually happens is the growth that actually occurs, right? Through the market, etc. But the aspect, the requirement is that you plan to accommodate that growth and that intensification.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. C, I see you have your hand up.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to let Mr. Bruder, I think, speak first, and then I want to talk a little bit about just the relationship we have with the region prior to Dave leaving. So I'll let Matt chime in first.
Sure, and thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, just a couple of comments. I know we talk a lot about growth targets and you know the need to meet them, but I think you know we're missing some key pieces of the puzzle here. Planning strategically right now, you know, as we look forward on the planning horizon, it's typically mandated to be 30 years. But you know, as it was mentioned before, we've got areas where you know we've got land that are vacant. A few areas we've got lands that are more suitable than others for higher levels of intensification. So, you know, in my mind, it's about making the best and most efficient utilization of the lands too, because we're looking at this fulsomely. I know we have to look out over the planning horizon, but maybe even beyond that, growth is going to continue. And if we don't, you know, and I'm not saying it has to be unbridled growth way beyond any growth target that's been conceived, but we have to look at it in terms of, you know, how are we best utilizing the land that's available to us in which to grow, because we are constrained. And moving forward, even beyond the planning horizon, I think we actually even have to put some thought into that as well. I know it seems really far away, but you know, once a land is developed, once we lose that potential to develop, you know, a vacant land or land that seems more suitable for intensification, that's gone. There's something else there, and you know, it's much harder to then up the utilization or efficient utilization of those lands later. So I just wanted to make a few, you know, confirmatory or clarification comments about that, and also, you know, I understand, you know, Dave, what you're saying from a regional perspective, but even from a local perspective, it goes beyond, you know, that we're always working in collaboration with the region on these complex applications, but we're also considering it in the larger context of planning policies and multiple levels of government too, that all have a part to play in the decision. So, I would be remiss if anybody was left with the impression that it was just that easy, that, the region just says nope, and it's up to the town. I don't think it's always quite the case. There's a variety of factors that go into us making a decision. And some of those, I've heard that we're referencing a specific development. Some of those we'll get into specific to that later on when the time comes. So I just wanted to make a few comments in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Bruder. Mr. CEO?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. And I want to thank Dave, for his comments. I'm not going to get into specifics of particular development, but I think it's important to highlight the working relationship we do have with the region. And I think that's one that has only been strengthened through Director Bruder, and prior to that, Director Dale. We've always had good relationships. I think, one of the things that I've prided myself on, and I think CAO Tripp and others have, is that we never look at each other as big brother, big sister, but rather equal partners going through this. And I would say our planners and regional planners look at all aspects. I would say regional engineering staff and our engineering staff look at all aspects. And I think, as Dave highlighted, and I do see him nodding, it's both regional and provincial plans that we're looking at to support that intensification. One of the things we heard at Roma, for those members of council that attended Roma last week, specifically when we were talking about transportation, but it applies very much for planning, and that is there's a fluid nature, whether it be intensification numbers, whether it be housing demand, whether it be the type of transportation people want. And if you think about, where we're going, 30 years ago, we were talking about transportation that looks very different than what we have now. Now we're talking about autonomous vehicles. We're talking about how and where people live. So, I think we need to build for the future. We need to look at our numbers. We need to look at housing demand. We've talked a lot about affordable housing, and those are all things that I think are always changing and fluid. And so I think allowing some of that flexibility is something both Dave and his team at the region, as well as ours here, are always doing. But I will get into more comments around this particular development that I think we're all talking about, and the, both the planning and public works engineering aspects that go along with it. So thank you. And thank you, Dave, again, to you and your team.
Thank you.
Deputy Clerk, I'm not seeing any more hands up. Are you seeing any questions?
I see no more questions, Chair.
Okay, I'm wondering if I could just pass the chair to Councillor Michalak so I could ask Mr. Hayworth one question.
Go ahead, Councillor. Go ahead, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Hayworth. Thank you very much for the presentation, Dave. Really some interesting comments. I appreciate the dialogue that has come out of your report. What sometimes at the core of the municipality is juggling with, as you mentioned, ability to go beyond the minimum. And you talk about smart growth, and smart growth is a terminology that's used quite often these days. With respect, in your opinion, Mr. Hayworth, from a region that's going through the OP revision, when we're looking at these numbers, and when we're being asked based on a secondary plan to meet specific people and job targets per hectare, and we're going beyond them, like grossly going beyond them, 40, 80%. Is that considered smart growth?
Through the chair, Councillor, I think that, it really depends on the situation. And I wouldn't want to comment. It really depends on the development, where it's happening. Is there servicing capacity? What's its relationship to the surrounding area and the planned surrounding area as well, right? Not just the existing surrounding area, but what's envisioned for that area over the next 30 years, and how does it fit in? from a servicing perspective, access, transportation, everything else. Yeah, and I would say, as what's been talked about, is a lot of development is coming in that is exceeding the requirements or what's envisioned by secondary plans and plans in place. And it is a challenge. And I think, you know, the best thing is to try and comprehensively look at it and look at, do we need to maybe update our plans? Do we need to update them from a policy perspective and establish some further parameters on the development to try and get a hold of it or revise it in any way, so that you're looking at it from a bit of a higher level than site specifically. And I know that takes time and resources, and we certainly would want to try and assist where we can with that, like we have with other plans with the town of Lincoln. But really, that's a difficult question to answer, and I really think it depends on the property, where it is, what's going on around it, etc.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair McCulloch. That answers my question, and I appreciate that, Mr. Hayward. Deputy Clerk, I see no hands. So thank you, David. Thank you very much for your time this evening and your presentation, and standing up and answering some of these difficult questions. But we do appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you very much.
There being no further questions of the presenter, I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson that council receive and file as information the presentation and delegation from David Hayworth regarding the Niagara Region's official plan update. I will now ask our deputy clerk, to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Regima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. So we now have delegations, Deputy Clerk. They've been waiting patiently in the waiting room. So we're ready to proceed with that, are we?
We are ready to proceed with that. And just so you know, Chair, our first speaker, Jennifer Haywood, has withdrawn her request, so we can move right into Susan Murphy.
Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once we have received the listed delegations, committee will then transition directly into the report and to the motion. So our first delegation will be Susan Murphy, speaking to report PD-0322, the zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions for Green Lane and Ontario Street. Susan, please go ahead, and remember, you have 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Mayor, and members of council. My name is Susan Murphy. I'm a resident of Vineland Station, and I was really hoping to be super prepared tonight, but I've had a bit of a family emergency, which I'm going to get back to shortly. But it's just it's a statement of how important I think this is that that I would like to speak now. Oh, did I lose you?
No, you were okay.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, I can't see you. Thank you so much. I'm not against the building on Green Lane and Ontario Street. I think it's a good spot, and we need to grow. We need to build. We need to densify. I get that. And I like it for farmland and natural environment preservation, but I want to speak to height. High-rise buildings, as opposed to low or mid-rise buildings, cause human isolation. They detach people from the street life, and that reduces the chance of encounters with others. It becomes like an encapsulated world in and of itself, and residents of these buildings often succumb to depression and other problems. So tall buildings, especially those of low architectural quality, and I'll get to that in a minute, they put psychological pressure on people. I'm not alone in feeling that pressure with the building right at the end of Ontario Street in Beamsville, the south end. It's a looming building blocking the sky, it actually hangs over the sidewalk. It hangs over traffic and foot traffic and vehicle traffic. So tall buildings, especially close to main roads, can disconnect people from their environment, especially when they become the focal point of a town. So human scale for buildings is like 4 to 6 stories. And that's when people thrive and they feel well in their environment and they get connected to things around them. And they thrive even more when a taller building has like a multi-use component. So places like Amsterdam and Prague, yes, I'm going to compare us to them because they have smart building. They have the densest populations and some of the happiest and healthiest communities because on their first street level, they have wonderful interactive local businesses like cafes and restaurants. Here we could have great fruit and vegetable markets, local businesses where people meet up and engage. And so economically, socially, it's a thriving, it's a live community. And I think it's very important that developers be held to a landscaping standard so that, if you have that big blank cement wall, for example, on the side of a building, that it could have some tree coverage. I'd like to see, a discussion around that. But I'm just going to say, I think we have to be more careful than we've ever been before with this building, because if a developer is allowed to go against the town's official plan, which I believe is 6 stories, with a 9-story building versus that healthy human scale of 6, then it will be the gateway, the floodgate, if you will, for every developer thereafter to successfully argue that their building can also be greater than 6 stories, 9, 12, or 18. I do like the place of this. I get that it's, it's close to an industrial area, and if the GO train ever comes, then we're set. And I don't want to lose farmland or natural space ever, but it's a really delicate balance right now on how we do this. There are buildings actually that are, like, I don't have all the answers, but I just like to say that there are buildings that are stepped with the front of the building showcasing like 4 or 6 stories and higher levels in the back of the building. That's just an example. They're not oppressive. I'd like to see a good development plan. So with landscaping, 6 stories would be great, or a stepped approach, but definitely that interactive component that includes the community. And all the comments about parking and traffic, I think that's going to press us to be innovative with what am I thinking? What is the word? Transportation. And I think we could just be leaders in mass transportation, and hopefully it will definitely impact the environment and our town. And that's all I want to say. And thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Susan. Are there any clarifying questions to the delegate from committee? Seeing none, our next delegation for this item is Andrew Bowles. Andrew, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chair Brunei, Mayor Easton, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Andrew Bowles. I originally spoke against the proposed zoning amendment request for the northeast corner of Green Lane and Ontario Street at the end of November. I'm here this evening not only to reiterate my opposition to the proposed zoning amendment and to the project as it stands, but to voice my disappointment in a staff report that I feel fails to stand up for citizens and fails to protect the character of our town. The report, as it's written, puts council in an unenviable position. Allow the erosion of our town's nature to begin, or vote against the staff report. Much has been made about this project being a tool for intensification. Staff make the point that the regional plan and secondary plan make the case for 125 and 150 persons and jobs per hectare, respectively. This project, according to staff, comes in at 392, blowing those numbers from the region and the secondary plan out of the water. Yet when people from the community say that the project represents over-intensification, which by staff's own numbers it does, the response is that staff are of the opinion that the proposed built form and massing have been suitably accommodated on the subject site and is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood context. I remind council that none of this would be an issue if the proponent showed any interest in the community's character and provided a project at the permitted 6 stories. You want to talk about intensification? How about going from 0 stories as is right now on this empty parcel of land to 6? So surely 6 stories is an improvement. But neither the staff report nor the applicant addresses the issue of why the project has to be 9 or 10 or whatever it was at the beginning versus 6 stories as is currently permitted in the bylaw, which brings me to my next point, height. The project that was before council in November was 10 stories. This is 9, and that's hardly a compromise. In the staff comments on building height, it's remarked that staff conclude that the proposed building height is compatible and sympathetic to the existing neighborhood context. I don't know how 9 stories is sympathetic to this neighborhood context that comprises of single-story homes. It'll be seen at least a kilometer down the road. A project of this height will dominate our Beamsville skyline. Again, the staff report dismisses the concerns of the community. Cookie cutter projects like this, indistinguishable from other projects of their type in Hamilton, Burlington, and elsewhere, represent a slippery slope for communities losing their character. There is nothing about this project that says this is Lincoln, this is Beamsville. We get the same dismissal of community concerns about traffic and parking. The community says that we're concerned about having at least 740 new cars in the area, but the report says that everything's fine, that the infrastructure can handle it. And as a cyclist in the area, I can assure you that it can't. And the report goes on to say that town staff and is working with the region on intersection design, which is great, but it doesn't change the fact there's 740 plus new vehicles in the area, in an area that's already having difficulty safely accommodating existing vehicular traffic, pedestrians and cyclists. People are worried about on-street parking as well, but the staff are of the opinion, as it says in the report, that the proposed parking is adequate to address resident, visitor, and commercial parking demand generated by the proposed development on site. But I'm not sure if that's the case. I've been down Green Lane recently, and there's on-street parking all the time. You can't tell me that there won't be an issue here in the future. As I've stated in the beginning, the staff report fails to stand up for the citizens of the community and fails to protect the character of our town. And I get the difficult position that this puts council in, but I ask council to vote against it. We need you to stand up for us. What's wrong with 6 stories for this development? What's wrong with a project that actually respects the character of our town? Where is the onus on developers to respect the communities that they are forcing these projects upon? Now, this project may ultimately go ahead, but we don't need to let it just happen, as the report suggests. When we have bulky cookie cutter buildings indistinguishable from the condo corridors of the GTA in the future, we will be able to point to this report and this project as the points in time when we surrendered our character. So I ask council, please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Almost, you scripted that right to 5 minutes, right on the button. Are there any clarifying delegations to the delegate from committee? I'm not seeing anything. Deputy Clerk, thank you. Thank you. Andrew. Our next delegation for this item is Ross Cronkright. Ross, please go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hey, oh, there I am. Sorry about that. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Ross Cronkright, and I'm a resident of Beamsville. I'm probably going to mundanely repeat the same concerns as the previous 2 delegates. I sat in on the August and November open houses, and upon my review of the current submission and updated plans, I've seen very little done to bring this project into alignment with the current zoning. Since November, the applicant appears to have taken a baby step towards compliance by deleting a single floor on the shorter side of the building, where the project design as a whole is still leaps and bounds above the current zoning requirement. The drawings presented themselves are ripe with deception in that the renderings presented are from an aerial perspective, which reduces the visual impact of how tall the structure really is. A height that will be overwhelming for the adjacent homeowners at street level, despite the angular setbacks the planning department is relying on in their recommendation report. The statistics matrix on the site plan references the building height at plus or minus 28 meters in height, meeting the draft bylaw, not the current bylaw of 12.5 meters. So this application is still non-compliant, being 50% higher at 9 floors than the current allowable 6, and 120% higher than the current zoning height allowances. From a livability standpoint and perspective, there were 2 comments council raised from the last open house that resonated with me. The first one being, given the restricting green belt and escarpment areas, the only way to achieve density targets was to go up. And the second one was more homes are needed to support the upcoming and growing manufacturing industry in the area. To the first point, I feel we need to have developers be more challenged and more creative in their thinking. I alone can walk down the Ontario Street corridor and find multiple opportunities for infill properties which can be reclaimed and repurposed into new development. The need to go higher is not an absolute by any means. And in the second point to more homes, I'm referencing back to the statistics matrix on that site plan again, where the 1 building apartments are less than 500 square feet in size, and the 2-bedroom apartments are only 750 square feet. Affordable housing should not be viewed as making a space smaller. How would any family be expected to flourish in units of this size? In the staff's recommendation report, I see the official and secondary plans do allow for taller buildings if the town is satisfied the design represents good planning. How is dwarfing the adjacent single home residence with 9 stories and stuffing families into 500 square feet boxes considered good planning? I'm afraid I don't see it. Historically, amendment requests of this nature typically achieve approximately 15% beyond the sitting bylaw, not 50%. In this case, that would be 1 additional floor, not 3. Allowing anything more than this would certainly shine the light of leniency on the town of Lincoln as a place to be for uncontrolled growth. This application seriously needs alteration to respect the zoning plans we already have set out. The conclusion that remains is, do the town representatives want to maintain a managed growth, retaining some of our small town touristic charm, or become just another blur on the map of condos as you pass by in the QEW? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ross. Are there any clarifying questions to the delegate from committee? Seeing none, thank you. Our next delegation for this item is Eric Fishley. Eric, please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening, and I won't reiterate some of the points that have been raised by the previous delegations, but fundamentally, I'm quite concerned that this development emboldens the continued trend to allow development, which is out of step with our approved plans. So the chart below just denotes other developments that not all are approved, but tend to be outside of our plans and the vision for our town. Specifically to the Green Lane proposal, the height is beyond and outside of the plan, as been mentioned by previous delegates, as well as the net density is well beyond what is set out within the plan. It's about 38.5% beyond what's on plan. Those 2 items alone should be significant showstoppers to ensure that we don't proceed until we get closer to plan or adherence to the plan. And the next piece is really about the misalignment to the character of the community, as the previous delegates mentioned. If we jump to the next slide, I'll go into detail on that. At the blue, I won't reiterate, that's the vision for our community and our town. On the green side, so right now, the Green Lane proposal is going to be 84% of it will be 1 bedroom or 1 bedroom and den. As someone who lived in a 1-bedroom and a den in a significant similar square footage, it is not a place really where you can grow a family. In fact, during the pandemic, when both my wife and I were mandated to work from home, I spent majority of my working days in the bathroom because it barely accommodates 2 adults. So these buildings tend to draw young professionals, which can't really grow families, or alternatively retirees that are downsizing. They tend to be transient because young professionals need space to grow their families, and alternatively retirees either to physical abilities changing or fixed incomes. When condo fees go up, they tend to leave as well. So they don't tend to really drive community growth within the building itself. Beyond that, I've already talked about how it's out of step with plan and the desire to grow smart. I recognize that we need to develop as a community, and we need to acknowledge that. But if we continually go outside of this plan and other plans, we need to really stop and ask ourselves, are we doing this in an intelligent manner? And what do we need to change about the way that we're going about this? The next piece, again, outlined in our vision, is about business growth and job creation. I want to acknowledge there is mixed use outcomes within the property, but there's only about 19 parking spaces that are available for them. So I don't know how much of a professional services growth this will drive. That's a bit of an assumption. But I think we need to really look at the accessibility of that mixed use and what kind of businesses and job creations it's actually going to drive. The other piece about moving around town, Green Lane right now is really more of a bike lane. The improved density of almost 40% beyond plan is going to create significant traffic issues, which we're already seeing in Ontario Street, plus the other developments that are coming. I think it would hinder our ability to move around town. Beautify the area, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I won't argue what's beautiful or not beautiful, but I think the reality is this development is so significantly beyond the current community that it imposes itself more than it complements the existing community. And it's not very innovative. It looks very much like every other development that we see on the QEW corridor. And it doesn't drive community connectedness. The concern here is really the frontage and how close to the road it is. It doesn't create a space for you to wave to your neighbors or get to know people or even have a conversation because you're so close to the road. So it really doesn't drive that feeling of connectedness that we're trying to build within the visions of our community. Another thing of concern I've heard throughout this is the use of the term growth and development interchangeably. And I want to be really clear. These are not synonyms. They mean different things. Growth is purely quantitative, where development is quantitative and qualitative. Growth is about the size of how big something became. Development is about how the change in the size of something improved or diminished its function. These are different things. And this is about development, not just simply about growth. And I think we need to be really forceful and have some clear direction, which we already have within our official plan, secondary plan, and bylaws about the way we want to develop our community. So if we just go to the last slide there quickly. So I asked that my concerns be registered. I asked that council reject the proposal as it sits. Again, I'm not anti-development, but we need to make sure our development adheres to our official plan, secondary plan, and our bylaws. But most importantly, for the vision of our community. We got to recognize that a lot of people put a lot of hard work, town staff, constituents, council, past and present, to deliver the vision that we have. It's not just enough to recognize their work, but we need to honor their work. And we need to really be steadfast in our commitment to our vision for our community and hold those that want to join our community accountable to the same vision. So with that, I ask that council reject the proposal as it stands. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eric. Again, I want to thank you. Almost scripted right to 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your words. And are there any clarifying questions from the committee for Eric? Seeing none. Thank you, Eric. Our final delegation is Joanne Tisello. Joanne, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Joanne. Yes, Joanne, we can hear you.
Hi there. Again, thank you for having me. I'm going to make it short and sweet because the last delegates kind of went through everything I feel. My thing I would like to add is building the units, like they said, the 1 bedrooms and the 2 bedrooms up to 700 square feet. I've lived in places as well like that, and what it becomes with the way the prices of houses are today, you will get all investors buying up those units before people can even get a chance to buy them. And then they will be rented out, and it will be all transients coming in. They will add no value to our town whatsoever, because they'll be working out of town. And within a few years, it will be run down and it will become the slums of Beamsville. And we don't want that in our town. We want family homes. We want 2 bedrooms, nice homes for people to come and live in. And like the height, again, is way too high for Green Lane. That is not even it's a country road, and they're putting this building on. And the new plan that they've submitted, the outside of it, the look of it, it looks like a jail. It's going to be a 9-story jailhouse. It doesn't appeal to anything to do with our community. So I just want to go along with the last few and say that I'm totally against this. Again, I'm not against growth, but not what they're showing us so far. So I just want that on the record. Thank you again for having me, and have a good night.
Thank you, Joanne. Are there any clarifying delegations, questions to the delegate from committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Thank you to all the delegations. In addition to the delegations that we've heard this evening, we have also received written correspondence from Steve Olescu, dated February the 6th, 2022. Christian Julian, dated February the 7th, 2022. Andrea Whalen, dated February the 7th, 2022. And J.R. Corey, dated February the 7th, 2022. Further, any correspondence that was received after the deadline has been circulated to council. I just want to reiterate that any correspondence that we did not talk about this evening has been received after the deadline and has been circulated to council. There being no further questions of the delegations, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell that council receive and file as information the following delegations and written correspondence regarding item 6.3.1, the zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions for Green Lane and Ontario Street. Susan Murphy, Andrew Bowles, Ross Concrete, Eric Fishley, Joanne Tisella, Stephen Olescu, Christian Julian, Andrea Whalen, and J.R. Corey. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Redeema?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. Deputy Clerk, I just want to make sure that my script is correct. So we are now going to consider item 6.3, the report. Is that correct?
Correct. And we have Matt here to present. Matt
Right.
Johnston.
Yes. Okay. So, Council, we will now consider item 6.3, report PD 03-22, regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions for Green Lane Road and Ontario Street. Prior to proceeding with the presentation, I will ask that council proceed with a majority vote to extend the speaking time. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Michalak that council extends the presentation time to 15 minutes. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote, or just ask for a sign of hands. Deputy Clerk?
No problem, Chair. May I have a sign of hands for those who are in favor of extending the presentation time to 15 minutes, please? Thank you, and that carries.
Thank you. I will now ask Matt Johnson of Urban Solutions Planning and Development Consultants to proceed with the presentation. Welcome, Matt.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, thank you for sharing my slide. Good evening, members of committee, staff, and public. My name is Matt Johnston, a registered professional planner and principal at Urban Solutions. operating out of Hamilton. It's my privilege to be retained by DeSantis Homes and to assist them in their planning applications located at the northeast corner of Ontario and Green Lane. I'm joined remotely by Mr. Gabriel DeSantis and Mr. Fernando Puga. You know, representing DeSantis Homes really is a privilege. I mean that when I say it. Some may be less familiar than others, but it was a number of years ago. I was here in front of committee and council and Mr. DeSantis on the redevelopment of the fairgrounds. And, you know, some of you will recall, we packed council chambers on a number of occasions, and it was that real level of engagement that resulted in direct impacts to the development that improved the end result overall. And similar to the fairgrounds, we received that same engagement through this process, resulting in a number of notable changes to the plan that I look forward to walking you through tonight. You know, DeSantis Homes is known for their contributions. Not only was it the Fleming Center that they've contributed to in the past, but also through, you know, more recent involvement with the contributions to the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital, notable donations over $100,000 in that regard. Also to the Jillian Center in St. Catharines with another notable donation to the through the Walk a Mile in My Shoes campaign. So, you know, we're fortunate to deal with a great community partner like this. And I'd like to now walk you through the proposal with one last quick thank you to staff, Matt Bruder and Melissa Shee, for their assistance through the process, and to all of staff for that matter who helped get us to where we are this evening. Next slide, please. Sorry, and we'll go to the next slide. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through where I'm going to go tonight. A quick overview. We all know the subject lands at this point. I'll walk you through the notable changes to the concept, and then we'll conclude with any questions that I'd be happy to answer. Next slide. Now, getting into things, many of you will be aware of the council priorities that have been established when council put forward the strategic planning for a future fit for Lincoln. Highlights council specific priorities to be a welcoming, connected, and vibrant, and most importantly, resilient community. And it's really through these priorities that help council make all their decisions and actually help guide some of the decision making that we made in terms of bringing this application forward. Next slide, please. Here we have an aerial of the subject parcel. We all know it at this point, a triangular parcel being just over 1.5 hectares in size, or 3.7 acres. Lands are currently vacant. Next slide, please. More broadly, we've got the commercial and industrial areas to the north separating us from the Queen Elizabeth Way. To the south, we all know we've got predominantly single detached dwellings, as well as to the singles to the east. And further east, we get beyond the urban boundary into the tenderfruit agricultural area. To the north and west, we've got the rail corridor marked for the future GO station. And we've got the commercial plaza directly to the west, as well as singles, again, further south and west of Ontario Street. Next slide, please. This graphic here represents a snapshot of where we are. We're nearing the completion of a process that began back on June 7th. This was followed by an information meeting held on August 16th. And then we made it to committee of the whole back in November 29th. Along the way, we made a number of submissions in response to comments that we've received. This included, two notable ones that went in on December 16th, as well as an addendum on January 12th. Ultimately, leading up to today's committee of the whole meeting and council a week today. Next slide, please. To recap in terms of where we started and where we are today, we had our initial height of 10 stories. We had our second submission that held that 10 stories, but dropped to 8 along Green Lane. And now what we have is an 8-story building along the Green Lane frontage with a recessed 9th story, recessed from Ontario Street and from Green Lane. Initially, we had 370 units with a density of 296 units per hectare. Our second submission held the line there. Through our third submission and the one before you tonight, we're now sitting at 346 units, 277 units per hectare. Now, and just to correct the second speaker, that's that actually comes in at 277, not the 300 and change that was quoted. And in our view, that's a modest increase from the permitted 200 units per hectare, not the 150 that was spoken to. From a traffic and parking perspective, we heard concerns in that regard. And initially, we came in with 402 parking spaces. Through the various iterations, we've increased that to 447 spaces. That's representing a ratio of 1.23 spaces per unit, well in exceedance of the bylaw requirement of 365 spaces. We also heard concerns over commercial space. Initially, we came in with 227 square meters dedicated to commercial uses. In our subsequent submission, we got a bit creative and we came in at 302 square meters with 78 square meters dedicated to flex space, really residential units that could be converted to ground floor commercial as well. Today, what we have is 569 square meters of commercial space fronting that on that Green Lane frontage. Now, that really captures some of the most notable changes. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the building and its various parts. So again, we have the yellow component on the screen here representing our 8-story component. We have our red and orange, our red component, sorry, representing the 9-story component. And in between that and the Green Lane, you can see the various colors that represent notable step backs. So again, the 8-story prominence of the building is stepped back from a podium, which is represented in blue. And then further, that 9-story component is further recessed back from the Green Lane frontage. If we go to the next slide, please. Now, this slide here highlights a number of the key elements of the plan. I'll start with the enhanced landscaping. What we have here is a unique opportunity to provide what we call a pop space, privately owned but publicly accessible amenity space on the eastern portion of the lands. We have lay-by parking serving the mixed-use component along Green Lane. And what we have there is an opportunity to really enhance Green Lane to be inclusive of the incorporation of bike lanes, the incorporation of the parallel parking spaces along the Green Lane right-of-way, together with the sidewalk component, and then the building recessed back. So it's incorporating those elements that really bring a safe street environment to the interface. So when we incorporate the building step backs beyond the podium to the 8th and the 9th story, when we accommodate these elements in the right-of-way and at grade, we're really making sure that we get this building done right at grade, which is one of the most important parts when you're dealing with buildings of this size. Next slide, please. Here we have the initial proposal with the 10-story element along Green Lane and Ontario Street, and the Ontario Street frontage having the 10-story component transitioning to the 8 stories along Green Lane. If we jump now to the following slide, you can see how we've reduced that height. And what we've done is really incorporate design elements that, again, ensure that that podium, that first to the third story elements are done right, with the building further recessed in behind. And you can see that articulation on the screen here for floors 1 to 3. Now I'll take you to the following slide with our rendering of the proposal, looking to the south and east. If you go to the next slide, again, I talked about the importance of the street face, the interface at the street, and how we ensure that we get that done right. And that's with the introduction of commercial uses at grade, an expanded amount of commercial uses at grade. We do that with the articulation of the building facade, and we do that with the important step backs. Then we also have the other colors illustrating our proposed bike lane, the sodded boulevard, and the lay-by parking serving those commercial uses. So it's these design elements that will ensure that that green lane improvements are done well and done right to ensure that the building meets and interacts with the street at a pedestrian scale. Go to the next slide, please. Now we've talked previously about some of the publicly, or sorry, the POP space, privately owned public space. And then we also have a large boulevard that is a notable point of discussion in that it appears that we have that Ontario Street frontage, but there is actually a parcel of land owned by the region. It's not part of the right-of-way, but it does present an opportunity to enhance that space on an interim basis. And what we've done is we've entered into a real unique partnership with the Vineland Research and Innovation Center. And we really think that this provides a unique opportunity to ensure that not only is the design incorporate the traditional landscape plan at the site plan stage, but by proactively collaborating with the Vineland Research and Innovation Center, we're really going to ensure that we excel in this area. Next slide, please. Here we have the eastern half where we're going to have the privately owned public space, POPs as we like to call it in the industry. Again, relying on our friends at the Vineland Research and Innovation Center to help ensure that that particular area is designed and programmed in a way that serves the residents of the existing community, residents of the future building, all while ensuring we use a plant species that's incorporates native species, incorporates a program space, again, that is accessible to all. Next slide, please. This slide here is really just a reminder about one of the most important factors at play when it came to laying out this site. We do have a 30-meter setback that we're required to maintain from the CN rails lines. So that played a key role in determining the configuration of the site and how things were laid out. Finally, we've worked with staff closely to ensure that we have a zoning bylaw that ensures what we've talked about is what gets delivered. You'll see the zoning bylaw has very specific requirements to require these step backs. And these zone regulations, at first glance, often people will say, look at all the changes to the bylaw that they need relief for. And what I want to do is really stress that that's not actually really what's happening here. It's really a site-specific zone that's really being created to recognize the unique configuration of the parcel, but also to prescribe those setbacks and really regulate the massing to ensure that what we're talking about is what gets delivered. So yes, the bylaw is looking for relief in certain areas, but collectively it's a combination of relief and prescribed requirements to ensure that we really, as some people would say, shrink wrap the zoning to accommodate this concept plan. So it really ensures what we propose is what gets delivered in the end. Next slide, please. And sorry, I was speaking to the zone regulations, and that was the slide that I intended to have here. So we're just a touch out of sequence. So I'll go one more slide. This slide really just highlights the additional material that was submitted that ultimately brought staff to a point where they could support the application. That included the updates to the revised concept, revised floor plans, revised colored elevations, the revised traffic impact and parking study, pedestrian wind and comfort study, functional servicing and engineering report, and the noise and vibration study, along with our angular plane sketches. So it was these updated materials that were reviewed by regional and town staff that led to the positive recommendation report.
Mr. Johnson, I'm going to ask you to try to please to wrap up in the next 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am on my last slide. If we jump to the next one. One of the things that we hear most is, what's in it for Beamsville? And, we heard earlier tonight through David Hayworth from the region regarding the updates to the official plan. We know we have targets to meet. And, I'm hoping to talk about the density question in a bit more detail through maybe some follow-up discussions, but achieving this modest increase in the units per hectare is really the way to secure some of those targets. And we can elaborate that through a Q&A period. But some of the key take-homes I'd like you to have is, again, the partnership with the Vineland Research Institute ensures that we're providing this element of green infrastructure, utilizing native plant species, and offsetting the carbon footprint. Another key component is how DeSantis Homes is an environmental leader when it comes to utilizing geothermal energy to heat and cool the facility. This cutting edge technology is going to eliminate hundreds of tons of annual carbon emissions annually. I think that this key take home really circles back to some of the climate priorities that were discussed in the regional update to their official plan, and is certainly aligned with the council priorities. From a housing perspective, we have a unit composition that's really intended to provide and serve the full range of residents of Lincoln. I was a little concerned with some of the comments earlier that suggested first-time homebuyers and retirees might be a little too transient, but this is housing and we need to provide it to all. And this project delivers that. And finally, another key take home is that these new residents are going to contribute $19 million annual to the local economy through their influx and contributions to area businesses. So it's these key take homes that I think circle back to the council priorities in terms of being a welcoming, connected, vibrant, and resilient community. And it's with that I find the application represents good land use planning. We're in full satisfaction with the recommended zoning bylaw that planning staff have put together. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and I do appreciate you being respectful of our time and trying to keep it to the 15 minutes. So thank you very much. And do members of council have any questions regarding the presentation to Mr. Johnson? I'm seeing Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Johnson. Again, thanks for coming in tonight again and bringing in the updated presentation. I'm going to be blunt. I am greatly disappointed in where we are and what you've brought back. I think that, again, you've completely ignored, if not completely ignored, a lot of the concerns that were raised by council at the last meeting and a lot of concerns raised by our taxpayers, which to me, I think that should be a lot more heavily weighted. In saying that, I'm wondering if you can walk me through some of that back and forth that you had with staff as part of the negotiation and give us a quick rundown of how we got to where we are today, where these minor changes that you've made, you think and staff think are going to be acceptable to the residents that pay basically all the salaries of all of our staff out here tonight.
Certainly. in terms of how we got to where we are today, it was a lot of good dialogue between the town staff and our consulting team, and then the decision making of DeSantis Homes. I hear the comments that suggest that you're disappointed, and it hurts me to hear that, because I think that we did really try to listen. So there were some major themes. There was themes over parking. We rectified that by a significant increase in the number of parking spaces provided in that corresponding ratio. We heard real concerns about ensuring it was a mixed-use building with substantial commercial space, and we certainly increased that amount significantly. We heard concerns about the height and the massing, and when we look at these images and the color distinguishes the various components of the building, I think that we try our best to ensure that they highlight the significance of those changes, but they really do ensure that that interface at the street is done well. These step backs that we're doing, having a real prominent ground floor or lower level podium through that articulation, is one that goes a long way in terms of creating that interface. Then we have another significant step back to the 8-story component of the building, and then a third notable step back to the 9th story. So that 9th story from Green Lane is really quite recessed back. We use our planning tools to find out what that interface will look like, and we've got this angular plane that is really one that tells us those step backs actually make real improvements to the plan. It ensures that that 9th story isn't overbearing. It ensures that even the 8th story is really at scale and in a way that it doesn't create any adverse impacts. So then we balance those we balance all of those objectives, with the other council priorities. And that's how I think we landed at something that said, okay, there's concerns raised, let's balance the objectives and find a way to still deliver a product, but still one that we think had notable regard for the feedback that we received.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Through you, Mr. Chair, follow-up?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the council priorities, and I'm wondering what council priorities would be missed, and which of your objectives in your massing would be possibly addressed if we had stuck to that the 6-story limit of our secondary plan that's currently approved.
Thank you. Through the chair. A good question, and this circles back to some of the line of questioning that we had about density and what happens if we don't meet our targets. And I think if we talk about those collectively, I think we'll see that buildings like this have to come forward. What happens if we stay at 6 stories? If we're stuck at 6 stories, we may not have a development at all. And I really mean that. When you look at the corridor of Ontario Street and we say, hey, look at all these opportunities for infill and intensification. The ability to bring projects on like this isn't easy. And the Ontario Street corridor represents that. We have to take opportunities like parcels like this one to say, okay, here's an application that's real, it's live, it's a proponent who can deliver it. And how can we do it in a way that gets it done right to ensure we don't miss out on the project altogether? And it's that notion that we have a project that checks all those boxes of the council priorities. If we don't bring this on stream and we're stuck at 6 stories, I'll be honest, the pro forma, it just doesn't work. Then we have this site that continues to sit here. We have another underutilized parcel that continues to sit. We need projects like this to come on stream to say, hey, now there's a critical mass that supports that GO transit station. Now we have a critical mass that supports other council priorities. And I think I'll try to tie in this density question a little bit. Why go beyond 200 units per hectare? And we go modestly beyond to 277 units per hectare in a way that again, delivers a real compatible built form, but it ensures that the overall density gets to where it needs to be. You won't hit an average of 200 units per hectare if you leave every new development stuck at 200, because we just won't get that development uptake across all the parcels to realize the types of population targets that we're talking about. So that's how, you know, I cringe a little bit when I hear developers are constantly blowing well beyond the units per hectare that are spoken to in secondary plans. I think when we look at it at a whole, you know, we bring forward these modest amount of increases, and some of them do, some of them go well beyond, I'll admit it, we've seen it happen. But when we're talking about a modest increase of 277 units per hectare, kitty corner to a future high order transit GO station, that's the type of density that it's going to take to draw that train out here. And not every parcel is going to come in at 200. So we need to sort of balance things out a little by accommodating modest increases like the one contemplated here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. My third question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And just before I ask that question, I just wanted to just give a quick response to that. Again, those intensification targets that we've just been presented tonight by the region, they're 29 years away. So let's be honest, like if for whatever reason, the math on whatever comes forth out of this meeting tonight doesn't work, there's plenty of time for that parcel to be developed. Like there's no shortage of developers lining up for some of the properties around town to put up something. We've seen that over the last couple of years, and it's not going to stop. And again, I think that's why we have to do our due diligence to make sure we aren't setting a precedent here by allowing unmitigated growth just for the sake of growth. I think we do have to be very careful in what we're doing. And to Councillor Bernays' earlier point about smart growth, I think we have to be very careful of the path that we choose to go forward for the residents of Lincoln. But with that being said, my third question, the traffic impact study that you guys paid for and submitted, was it done by a company that you've used in the past with some of your other developments?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Next up, we have Deputy Mayor and Councillor McPherson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to the delegation, and thank you, Matt, for the presentation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about commercial. And I want to reference, first of all, Susan Murphy's comments earlier tonight. It really resonated with me what she spoke about in that, and I probably have not taken this down precisely, but I think I've got the gist of it. And she said, when she talked about tall buildings disconnecting people, and that the ground level is key to connecting people through cafes, restaurants, retail, etc. And I couldn't agree with that more. You are proposing a community on its own here. When you're talking about possibly 500 people or more living here, it's a community. And commercial is absolutely critical to that community. So we look back at the report, and in the report, it talks about general commercial land designation, which this is. And the objectives under general commercial is, and pardon me for reading this, but is to foster a vibrant, connected, walkable, and bikeable retail and commercial environment, and to encourage the provision of a sufficient level of variety of retail activity to satisfy the consumer demands of residents. The report then goes on to state that the subject lands are designated as mixed use, a key policy objective in the incorporation of commercial uses on the ground floor close to the front property line in order to frame and animate the street. So we're talking about life, giving life to the bottom of the building. So as you know, this development is in the GO station secondary plan, that has its own intensification. And also, is on the Town of Lincoln Intensification Corridor. So again, a growing area, lots of activity, lots of new people coming to live in that area. So during the public meeting, I was one that commented on the need for more commercial. And as you pointed out tonight, the response was that you added 266 square meters to the commercial. I think we are still short of where we should be for this development in this location. You know, we have a target, if you will.
Counselor, you're muted.
Counselor, you're muted, Counselor.
Sorry, I must have hit a button there. We have a target of 50% of the ground floor. And to get close to that, we need to add more retail, more commercial. So I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, through you, if I can ask the presenter if consideration would be given to further increase the commercial space, bringing us closer to that zoning requirement for general commercial.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you for your comments, and certainly your previous comments were a driving factor in the increase that we did provide. You know, the amount of commercial space is one that we really want to be mindful and sensitive to. I talked about the influx that these residents will have on the broader community, and that includes supporting those existing local commercial establishments. We have been talking about how we can look at providing more, and we're certainly open to that conversation. I think there's scenarios where we can provide a further increase to that commercial component, that straight commercial space. And then what this proposal did was, this previous iteration removed what were live work units, this flex space that we talked about. And I think that adding that flex space to that Green Lane frontage as well would be a way to find that perfect balance in terms of the floor space that we deliver from a commercial perspective. So we would be happy to carry on that discussion.
Okay, thank you, Matt, for that. And I'm wondering then, Mr. Chair, if I couldn't bring a motion to add to the bylaw tonight that we could entertain throughout council. And I wonder if now would be the appropriate time to share that, Madam Clerk, or do we wait?
Hi, Counselor, through you, Chair. We are only at the presentation of this portion. So once we move into the report section, then I suggest bringing that amendment forward.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Deputy Clerk, I'm showing Counselor Mikulak followed by Counselor Timmers. Is that correct?
You are correct.
Thank you. Counselor Mikulak, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair Bernay. Through you to Mr. Johnson. Very detailed report or presentation you presented. A number that I just quickly caught was that you noted that the taxes generated or raised would be about $2.3 million. How did you arrive to that number?
Yeah, so that number was really calculated in an estimate in terms of the uptake land value and applying the town's mill rate to come up at the 2.29.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to follow up to that, would the developer be seeking a CIP or a tax incentive grant or grants? And if so, is that number of 2.3 million before or after that sort of request?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, thank you for the question. what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is try to circle back on that question, if I could have an opportunity to do so, just to make sure that I get my numbers correct and I don't speak out of turn.
Thank you.
That's fine, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Mikulak, do you have another question, follow up?
I do, but I see the CAO's hand.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just, I think, really briefly speak to the CIP question. I know Director Bruder, Ms. Shi, and myself on one occasion have shared that our current CIP program is under development and likely finds itself being in a very different iteration. I think what we've shared is that we'll likely be moving forward with something that's much more focused on environment, green infrastructure, and affordable housing. And so I think when we look at future CIPs, those are probably conversations we need to have. I know the proponents did share with planning staff some interest in looking at geothermal, looking at other green infrastructure type initiatives. So I think the day and age of our CIPs, the way they stood years ago, when there wasn't development coming to Niagara, and that wasn't that long ago. I remember when I started 6 years ago, that was a very different situation through all parts of Niagara. I think what you're seeing is an evolution of our CIP program, and we've been very clear from a staff perspective that it's currently under review. So,
thank you. And I have.
Thank you, Mr. CAO.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Councillor Mikulak.
I have one more question through you to Mr. Johnson. You use the word modest, and our secondary or our GO secondary plan, it states 6 stories with the minimal increase considered by planning staff or council. So knowing this, why was there no consideration in the first place to come up with a plan or a design or a project that had a minimal ask rather than a modest one?
Thank you. Through the chair, that secondary plan is certainly a good guiding document in terms of the long-term intentions. The policy, I think, was really crafted with good intentions to allow that increase beyond 6 when you check X, Y, and Z. And what I think we've really demonstrated is that we have checked X, Y, and Z. So when do you get to go beyond 6? You get to go beyond 6 when you check all the right boxes, and that includes a development that is appropriately masked with elevations that provide the right articulation, with elevations that include the right building step backs, to ensure that the increase from 6 to 8 with a 9-story element is one that's done sensitively. And I think we've done it in a way that doesn't have any adverse impacts. There's interfaces where 6 stories will be more appropriate to hold the line. That interface would be one where you might have singles directly abutting the property on the north and west, where sun shadow is a tighter consideration. In this case, our sun shadow is falling to the north and west onto the arterial roads in the rail corridor. So you're able to provide that, I call it a modest bump, because there are no adverse impacts. And then we look at it, we say, hey, here's an opportunity to, again, balance objectives. And we can achieve that balance by giving the relief needed to get to 8 and to 9. And we can do it because we don't create those adverse impacts.
For that, sir. And if I may, Chair Bernay, one more question regarding traffic. You noted that there was a traffic study performed by a firm that you've retained. Were they knowledgeable to the town of Lincoln's proposed truck bypass route, or also the bypass route for vehicular traffic as well, that will direct traffic down Bartlett Road and possibly increasing traffic on Green Lane as a consequence?
Thank you. Through the chair. What's really important to know is and understand is that, and I'm speaking a little more broadly to those members of the public who are watching. These traffic studies are prepared by professional engineers. They create a terms of reference that's discussed and embedded with regional and local staff to ensure that all of these issues, like the ones you're speaking to, are taken into account. In this case, the study was prepared, reviewed, and vetted by both the region and the town, and are satisfied with the conclusions. We have a holding provision in place that really ensures that that we take a closer look at implementing mitigation measures as a result of the findings of this study. And it's with that holding provision and that second review through the site plan process and the H removal that will ensure that all aspects of what makes this particular corridor and its networks unique are that we ensure we take those into account.
And I asked that question because the traffic study is performed based on current, projected, but perhaps not anticipated rerouting of traffic that might occur should we move forward with that Bartlett Road detour. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Michalak. I was going to go to Councillor Timmers, but I see Mr. Bruder's hand up. Did you have something specific that you wanted to discuss at this point, Mr. Bruder?
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Yeah, just kind of further to that question, because I think it's a good one. As a professional engineer that they are, one of the first places they would look to see, what kind of modeling we've done in our area. And when you look at our transportation master plan, that's certainly a document that contemplated that potential rerouting of trucks. So it's definitely would have been an input into their study. So I just wanted to make that clarifying point because I think it was a good one. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bruder. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Bernay. I also am looking at the ground floor in the commercial space, and I tend to agree with the previous comments. And also some of the comments from the delegation absolutely were very good points. And I see the bottom level as a lively part of that community. It is a standalone building, cafes and businesses on the ground floor. And I absolutely support increasing that space. I have a question around the flex space. So if you could just elaborate a little further on that flex space, because I'm not quite sure I understand what the flex space is.
Thank you. Through the chair. The flex space is really a unique approach to creating what we call live work spaces, particularly at the ground level of a building like this. It really gives unit owners the ability to use that space in a way that they see fit. So you may end up with a scenario where a third half of those units take advantage of and implement that commercial component to the permission, to their ground floor space, whereas others may hold the line, may hold on to a more residential feel. So there's some great instances out there where this flexible zoning has been created, and you'll get a little bit of a rhythm to the street where one or two units might have that ground floor patio. The next unit might be that entrance to a small commercial space that's been utilized through that flexible zoning. So the previous iteration had the commercial lands or the commercial floor space concentrated on the eastern component of the ground floor. And what we would then do is carry that further west towards the corner of the building. And it would be those ground floor units that enjoy that flexible space. Again, not all will particularly rely on it, but it's certainly there for those who would like to use it.
Okay, great, thank you. Chair Bernay, I have another question.
Go right ahead, Councillor Timmers.
as a member of the Housing and Homelessness Community Partnership Advisory Committee, in our November meeting, we had looked at the analysis of the region and the revised forecast for the incidence of poor housing need in Lincoln from 2016 to 2051. And out of that came a motion from the Housing Committee that the targets be increased to, our needs would be 185 one-bedroom units, 10 two-bedroom units, and 9 three-bedroom units for rentals. And under ownerships, 234 bachelor one-bedroom, 16 two-bedrooms, and 14 three-plus bedroom units. So affordable housing is something that we certainly need in our community. And when I look at this building, I look for an opportunity to address some of our affordable needs that we have for affordable housing in our community. So with that said, Centerville had some units, I believe 16, you could correct me if I don't have the right number. So what I would like to see with 346 units, how many of those would be an entry level for people to be able to purchase and move into something that's somewhat affordable and have the opportunity to provide some affordable housing for people in our community? And what would be the process? So I'm just wondering if there are units and how many there might be, and how does one actually apply and gain and able to purchase one at an entry level? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, this housing crisis that we're in is one that, it's top of mind to all of us, and for good reason. We're all thinking about our loved ones trying to crack the housing market. And one of the key ways to do that is by introducing a variety of built form. So by bringing online these 346 units, we're going to alleviate a price point or introduce a price point that's currently not really available to the residents of Beamsville. So in this case, we've got 141 one bedroom, 148 1+10, and 57 two bedroom. So that varied unit composition is going to have a range of price points. And generally speaking, we'd consider the vast majority of those to serve the entry-level housing market, to be that first time, that first opportunity where someone gets to get into the housing market. Will it be their forever home? For some, maybe. For others, it won't be. It'll be that important entry into the housing market, allowing them to further, move on as their lives change and grow. So it's really providing that varied built form, or that varied housing product in the form of these apartment units, that's going to relieve pressure and really allow a crack in the crisis to get their foot in the door of the housing market. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. I'm not quite sure I heard what I was looking for, and that was a number of entry level, which would be below market cost, at a lower price point.
Right. In terms of, and we, this topic gets in, there's a lot of different terms that are thrown out there. There's, whether it's affordable or attainable, all have different connotations and meanings to everyone. In terms of what's affordable and attainable, we'd be happy to kind of work with the town to look at where these units fall into the broader market to hone in on that specific question, because as I'm sure you can appreciate in your position, it's a number that it's a bit of a moving target, and one that we'd have to really pay attention to when the units actually come on stream.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I'm satisfied with that answer. If you're willing to work with the town to address that option, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Bruni.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. I saw our CEO's hand go up. Mike, did you have anything to add specifically to Mr. Johnson's comment about being able to work with the town on meeting an affordable housing threshold?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I think Mr. Johnston got there at the end. I was just going to say, I think, to my previous comment around looking at the type of programs we have, absolutely, that's what we envision, Councillor Timmers. And I think as we look at the various elements of what we're going to bring forward, I think as we've always said, and I know members of the committee have said, Kathleen has said this, I have, if we want to be in the affordable housing game, we need to come to the table. And I think we need to look at how we do that. So absolutely, I think, my simple answer is yes to your question, Councillor, but we can get into more details both at the Housing Committee and the work that Chair Mikulik is doing with the committee and Chair Regima did prior, but more to come on that piece. But rest assured, we are going to be working with this proponent.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Bernay, and I'd just like to apologize for coming late to tonight's meeting. Just wanted to let everyone know today's my father's 93rd birthday, and he passed away a little over 6 months ago. And Friday is my parents' 61st wedding anniversary. So we went out as a family tonight and told some stories and gave each other a hug. And you know what? It was necessary. So glad to be here. I didn't have dessert, so I joined you guys tonight. So thank you for indulging me. And Matt, it was Councilor Timmers, thank you for going there, because that's where I was going to. Matt is a commitment, to do like you did in Centerville, Matt, to have a number of units at that below market as an incentive, also by exceeding the height. So I appreciate that. I appreciate Mr. Kirkopoulos also saying that that's something that we could work towards. A couple questions. One with respect to the commercial space and the wanting to, increase that. How do you envision, Matt? So these are maybe more, and I don't know if you're there yet on your design, but more technical looks. Is it going to be like the development along Ontario Street where the units were fronting on Ontario with a flow through, so they were more linear in fashion, and entrance on the backside where the parking is? Having had a business trying to comprehend if they're not done that way, how someone on the backside would make a go of it without that street front presence. So just asking.
Thank you, and a good question. Through the chair, this particular floor plan, unfortunately, it wasn't introduced into my slideshow, but the floor plan that staff have seen, it illustrates how the commercial space is really single loaded to the south side of the interior corridor.
Okay.
So it won't be that through environment. And I think you brought up a great point, because what that does is really ensure that all that activity that we're all looking for happens on Ontario Street, that it's not happening in the back parking lot where some of that animation would or happens in some of your other commercial locations. So in that sense, it ensures that lively animated street frontage happens because of that interior corridor, and it only representing half of that wing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And second question, if I may, Councilor Bernay, Chair Bernay.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm looking at the previous, or the building elevation south, page 159 of 227. So, approximately, so the higher, the 9th floor is fronting on Ontario Street, where the 8th floor runs the expansive Green Lane. What's that percentage, Matt, of the 8 versus the 9? Like rough, is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? Just looking for a little something there, because you get different views from each one of the different elevations, like the photos. So it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I'd say it represents about 1/3.
Okay. And in that, and if I may, and so a follow-up to that, so is typically the section fronting along Ontario Street that goes higher, how is that different? Are those the site of the bigger units, of the 2 bedrooms, or?
Okay, so through the chair, in one way, it's different in the sense that it's stepped back another 3 meters from the 8 and from the podium down below. So it does represent a notable setback in that regard. So it's the 9-story component is distinctly different in that sense. In terms of the unit allocation, there's still a mix, in terms of the 1 and the 2 bedrooms that are allocated throughout. So
Okay.
It's not like all of the 2 bedrooms are located at the top. That's
Yeah, so it's not going to be segregated to one side versus the other, right? It's a
right.
mix in between. Okay.
Scattered throughout.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bernay, can you hear me? I did see his connection drop. I'm just going to give him a moment to reconnect.
Councillor Patriba, are you all good? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good recovery there. Again, a couple more questions. I apologize for having to come back. Councillor Gemma just went in the queue if she wants to go ahead of me. I know that's Councillor Wright. She hasn't asked a question yet.
Councillor Injima, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Russell, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering and thank you, Matt, for the presentation. There's been a lot of good questions. You talked at one point about the feasibility of this development if it were scaled back, if you cut back on the mass a little bit and units and the height. So can you expand on that a little bit on your pro forma? And, can you tell us absolutely that there's really no way to scale this development back further? And please tell us why.
Thank you for the good question. Through the chair, the performance are often complicated. They're not transferable across the board. There's so many nuances to any given site. But in this particular case, we have a regular shaped parcel, and then we have this desire for density to implement that vision of the secondary plan. And when you start to peel it back and you say, okay, let's say not 8, not 7, stick to 6, things start to happen to the plan where the viability for underground parking becomes very questionable. And next thing you know, you wind up with a plan that scraps the underground parking and replaces it with more surface parking areas. And it's decisions like that can be really detrimental to the overall product and the actual built form. So you wind up in scenarios where you can see, and I've seen it happen, where this decision comes, okay, if I can't go to 8 stories with a 9-story element, and I'm stuck at 6, well, I'm going to have to scale things back. And by scale things back, I mean no underground parking. I mean scale things back on not being able to incorporate step backs and building articulation. So the pro forma, the unit yield brings this kind of critical mass to allow all the good things to happen. And by good things, again, I mean the publicly, privately owned, publicly accessible pop space. It allows us to really articulate this building. You know, if it's 6 stories, do you still need a building step back? I would say so, but the numbers are thrown off to the point where you can't accommodate that real good urban design building material to deliver a built form that still meets those good design objectives. So you know, does it scrap a project in its entirety? Perhaps not, but it certainly brings it back to a point where you're not going to deliver all of the good things that a project like this does. You know, so it provides a critical mass to make the pro forma work, to then go on and deliver all the contributions that the project brings to it.
Thank you. Clarification question, Mr. Chair, and then I have another question.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. So it's a balance, and you looked at all different elements within the pro forma and decided that in order to provide these other elements that you're talking about, you need to meet this density. So did you scale it back and look again and say, if we were to bring it back down to, let's say, 8 stories all across, or 9 stories at the front and 7 stories across the back, or something like, did you go through that process and say, okay, this is the point at which we can no longer provide underground parking, and this is at the point at which we can no longer provide this amenity space off to the side? Did you go through that process?
We did go through that process, and you know, we had really specific conversations with staff on how we could really ensure we incorporate some of these key components. You know, those key components being building articulation, step backs that were really key in ensuring that height gets done properly. So when push came to shove and we were saying, you know, where do we need to land? That was really based on the questions that you just asked, is, you know, how much parking, what does the site look like when we do all parking at grade? And we look at that product and we say, that's not checking enough of the right boxes. And that's really how we circle back to say 8 stories across Green Lane, a 9-story element, good underground parking, a pop space. You know, again, it's a massing that I know there were critiques on the building facades and their elevations, but that type of articulation doesn't come with a 6-story building. You start to really claw back on you know, high quality urban design and high quality materials that make buildings like this work when you start to remove floors just for the sake of removing floors. And that's where, again, I kind of circle back to balancing. You know, what would the plan look like if we lopped off 3 stories? Well, it would look like a lot more commercial a lot more ground floor parking. We'd have a product that it just doesn't deliver the vision that council's striving for. You know, we get a little bit of relief on the units per hectare and 8 stories with a 9-story element. And then we're able to deliver a building that's articulated. We're able to deliver a building that is made of the high quality materials that DeSantis is known for, and that will ensure that a building like this gets done right. Again, you take off floors just because the policy says 6. We really take a close look at it and we say, by going to 8 with 9, what are the impacts of that? What are the adverse impacts? And what we've done was we looked at sun shadow, we looked at wind, we looked at angular plane, and we said we can accommodate this modest increase to ensure that we do it right. And the fear is that when you simply lop off stories and units to stick to previously established numbers, you're missing out on opportunities to secure good high quality materials, good high quality urban design. And that's how we landed at where we are.
Okay, so a clarification question to that also. you've alluded to the idea that I mean, it's an odd site. It's an odd shaped site, no question. And so you've attributed some of the need for this density and the design, et cetera. Well, you've attributed some of the need for the density to the shape of the site and the difficulties with fitting everything that's required in that site. Can you expand on that a little bit more? What is it exactly about the site? I know it's a triangular site and you had your setbacks from the tracks that you need to meet, but what else about it really makes it that difficult to meet your needs under the pro forma?
Thank you. A good question. So I think just on a real simple level, you've acknowledged the fact that triangles are not rectangles or squares, which are certainly a lot easier for our engineers and architects to work with. So that does introduce an increased element to the structural cost of such a building. So that's just straight geometry. When we look at, I guess the second half of the question, those elements, they have to be sort of acknowledged to a certain extent. It's unique. It does result in that increased cost just to deal with the dynamics. But just because it's this irregular site, there's sometimes a notion that the fact that we need to increase it, maybe it suggests this site's not well intended to accommodate density. And I want to kind of counter that it certainly is. It's really that perfect candidate because of its location at Green Lane in Ontario, because of its key location within the GO secondary plan area, and being right along Ontario Street. It's the ideal candidate to accommodate a modest increase, again, because there's none of those adverse impacts that are more typically associated when you're having a direct interface with low density properties to your north and west. So it's with that in mind that we say, okay, it's irregular. There's complications associated with the rail setback that drive the pro forma. But again, we say, just because it's irregular doesn't mean it's not an ideal candidate for this form of a build, for this form of intensification. And I think kind of staff recognize that in their analysis and commend them for really highlighting the candidacy of this particular parcel to get a little bit of relief because it's irregular and because it might look like a strike against it on its irregular shape, but it's such a stronger parcel given its location in the context of Beanville and the infrastructure and the planned infrastructure around it.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my question was more, what about the site makes it difficult for you? And you've addressed that, I think. But to me, it's the site itself that makes it difficult for me. And I understand what you're saying that the impacts are less and it's ideal and it's a perfect opportunity to add additional density. But to me, it is the size, the shape of the lot, and just where it's situated. It makes it uncomfortable for the mass. And just one more question through you, Mr. Chair, if I can.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Did you consider doing a 3D? I know this is a 3D rendering. Did you consider doing one of those that you can walk around the building and sort of have an interactive experience at the ground level?
We're with the level of detail that we've created so far, the ability to go to that next step isn't too far away. Unfortunately, I don't have one to share with you tonight, though. So,
yeah, I think that would have helped. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a couple of questions. First one back to Mr. Johnston. Again, sorry, one of the comments made earlier kind of left a knot in my stomach, so I'm just trying to work my way through it. So when you led off this presentation, you talked about all the community benefits that Mr. DeSantis has provided over the years, and again, all his charity contributions. Yet when the affordable housing aspect of this came up, it seemed like the answer was at this point in time, there is no plan for affordable housing as it stands tonight. The answer would be basically we're providing a lot of new stock that will allow people to enter into the housing market, but nothing specifically to affordable housing, which then kind of translated into an entertainment of the option if staff, or sorry, if the town were to incentivize you, that you would entertain it, not necessarily in lieu of the extra 3 stories or the 40% increase in density, but if the town were to give something back to the developer, that you would entertain affordable housing. Is that correct?
Through the chair, this I don't disagree with what you've characterized so far in terms of what this product delivers by coming on stream. And as the CAO alluded to, we'd be happy to work with the municipality on bringing this affordable component in a way that's consistent with a lot of the best practices across the GTA on introducing affordable housing. Again, it's the terminology is key, definitions are key, and the idea of bringing these on, the percentage of what requires any intensification or an active program with the municipality really remains to be seen, because I'm quite confident in that the price points of these units will be below the average market value in the area. But again, happy to kind of carry the conversation on with staff. I know you've got a good team and everyone's motivated to do it. So we're certainly looking forward to being a partner there as we have in the past. So I am happy to, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of DeSantis Homes, to work with the municipality in this regard. Will it involve a partnership with the municipality? Perhaps, but some of it will be delivered in its own right. Again, just by the very nature of delivering a product that's currently underserved in the area.
No, and I appreciate the honesty in that answer. Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just Councillor Russell. I'm just wondering, in an emphasis to try to answer your question or put your concern to rest, if the CAO or our Director of Planning have anything to add to what Mr. Johnson said before we go to Councillor Russell's next question. Anyone wanting to jump in? If I see a hand, I will go there. Otherwise, I'll go back to Councillor Russell.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think, I think it's an oversimplification of how affordable housing works. I'll make that comment. Councillor Russell and I have had this conversation as I've had with all members of council, and specifically the housing committee. So I think, if we want to get into the conversations, when we get to the staff report on affordable housing and how affordable housing works, and the need to have a provider who also is part of the conversation. I wish it could just be the local municipality dealing with the developer, but I think Councillor Brunet, if I think about the meeting we had with NRH staff last week, it is a much more complex conversation. So those would, I think, be my comments, but definitely open to talking about it more should council have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor Russell, continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Last question. This question is to our CAO. So just going back to the CIP discussion that you brought up earlier, and that, again, we're currently in the process of reviewing our CIPs, as has been the case for the last 9 months or so. The answer you gave was a little bit different than the answer I received last week when I asked that to Director Dale about what this development would be potentially able to apply for. Would they apply for the CIPs as they exist today? or would they be frozen until our CIP review is done and whatever new CIP versions are available? Where would they stand as far as what they might be eligible for?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I would say I don't think Director Dale or I are, I think differing in terms of our answers. There is a current CIP in place. Technically, that CIP is still in place until council repeals that CIP. However, we have been incredibly forthright with Mr. DeSantis and Homes by DeSantis that it is currently under review. And I think, like with most things, it will require a negotiation. It will require a staff report that potentially speaks to it. I don't think any of us want to get into any litigation over previous CIP versus current CIP. So I stand by my comments, notwithstanding Director Dale's comments last week about the current CIP. We have been incredibly honest and forthright with Urban Solutions, with Homes by DeSantis, that our CIPs are evolving and that they will be much more focused than in the past.
Thank you very much.
So I'm not seeing any hands. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to Mr. Johnson before I ask Councillor Michalak to take the chair so I can ask a question? Is there anyone else looking to speak to Mr. Johnson this evening? I'm not seeing anything. Councillor Michalak, could you please take the chair?
Pleasure. Go ahead, Councillor Renee.
Thank you, Councillor Michalak. So through you to Mr. Johnson, Matt, I want to go down the same kind of questioning as Councillor Rinjema. I unfortunately might not be as articulate as she was. So I want to be clear. We're going to probably go into a vote here later this evening after we go through the report, and I just want to make sure that I clearly understand that, you purchased this property, just over a year ago, January 2021. Is that correct?
To be honest, I'd have to circle back to some notes to double check the purchase date.
Okay.
It was a relatively recent purchase, so I would agree.
Okay. So the property, suffice it to say, the property hasn't changed since the time you acquired it. It's still that triangular piece that you expected to buy, that you knew was in the development, commercial DC, and that had a zoning by secondary plan for 6 stories, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So I'm really trying to understand what you're saying. I heard loud and clear, I think all of committee heard loud and clear tonight, that you're willing to look at the commercial, and Councillor McPherson, I think, is probably going to look at a motion to add as we go through the report this evening. We've heard some thoughts about affordable housing. Our CAO has also spoke to that. But I just want to be clear on what you're saying about the height, because I think what I'm hearing is that you're saying that your client is not willing to move an inch, and it's 9 stories and 8 stories, or the project doesn't go forward from your position. I just like to know if you can make a comment to that, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. You're correct in that the framework that we're looking at hasn't changed since the property was acquired. So in fairness, those densities, the 6 stories was known at the time of purchase. But that didn't preclude us from saying, hey, if we're gonna make a go of this, where's a reasonable place to land in terms of what we think we could get approved to help determine how viable a redevelopment like this might be. So again, I think it is worth acknowledging. I think it was a good question. What's changed? Why do we need to go beyond? If we went in with eyes wide open, we certainly did. No, that wasn't that long ago. But that doesn't stop us from saying, yes, these are the rules in place, but what would the right development look like if we explored it? And again, that's, I don't want to repeat too much of my previous question, but that's where we were able to accommodate underground parking, where we're able to accommodate much more building articulation than a much smaller, less dense building could accommodate. So it was this combination of factors that said, 8 stories and 9 can still be a go. And, we looked at that issue hard and close. Staff did a good job at really pressing our architecture team to ante up the urban design elements, where we, those step backs are really achieving good objectives. They're not just token step backs. They're done with intent, and they're done in a way that really accommodates the additional height. So I think we are confident that we have a product that achieves good urban design, that allows this project to proceed. I think we do at this point. We've really flushed it out. We need to hold the line where we are now, 8 stories across Green Lane with that 9-story component, in order to bring this forward.
And that's great, Mr. Johnson. I really appreciate you, answering the tough questions and giving us the straight answer. And you're absolutely right. You're not the first developer, and you certainly won't be the last developer that tries to push this development and this densification as far as you can. Push the envelope as far as you can. And that's what's happening, and we all know it. So I appreciate your really honest answer. Just one other question, Chair Michalak. I hope that we can answer when we go to the report, Mr. Johnson, the uncertainty, the misnomer of what's happening with community benefits. And Section 37, I'm hoping our CAO and our Director of Planning can really expand on that, so our residents really understand what is happening with the community benefits. But I'm wondering if you could just clarify. I've spoken to staff, but I just want to make sure that I clearly understand from the developer standpoint, the $500,000 that's being offered in community benefits. From what I understand from the report, that is going to a reserve for affordable housing. However, it's my understanding that the $500,000 is minus the public open space, B, the park enhancements, whether it be benches, whether it be landscaping, whether it be concrete pavers, and C, public art. So let's just say that those 3 components, A, B, and C, cost the developer $400,000. What comes to the municipality in terms of a community benefit check to our reserve fund?
Johnson?
Hi, Vice Chair. I believe the CAO has his hand up also.
I'd like to hear the response from the proponent first before we go to the CAO.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Burnett, for the good question. The community benefits charge is certainly one for those that may have not have gone through the staff report in more detail, is certainly one that, and it actually speaks to the other comment I wanted to make. Community benefits, Section 37 isn't a trade for height for a contribution. It's does that building check the right urban design and planning questions in of itself. So we all have to be satisfied that before we even talk about a Section 37 agreement, that we're already satisfied with the built form that's proposed. And I wanted to just touch on that because your first question left me with a bit of a follow-up of my own comment, about being not the first developer, not the last, to push the envelope. And that's where I want to say, are we pushing the envelope? That might be one way to say it, but what I'd like to say is that we're not pushing the envelope. We're bringing a built form that represents good land use planning, one that evaluates all kinds of planning dynamics and one that me as a professional planner and your staff are confident to say this balances all our objectives and represents good land use planning. We have to establish that before we get into the contributions that come with the Section 37 agreement. So that's just at a high level, big picture component. More specifically to the ultimate dedication, we do have a process in place to work with the municipality on that Section 37 agreement. We are delivering community benefits through the introduction of some of those key elements, and that's why you're seeing them highlighted from the charge. There were conversations about what the specific items cost, and I don't have those with me to really hone in on that, but it's certainly part of the conversation that we'll carry on as we enter into the agreement itself.
Councilor Bernay?
Yeah, okay. I didn't really get an answer to my question, but I understand Mr. Johnson doesn't want to go beyond that. So I'll leave my questioning there. And I thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
AO had his hand up earlier. Did you want? Okay, you're good. You're satisfied. Okay. Councilor Bernay, do you have any further questions?
I do not, Councilor Michalek. Thank you very much.
I shall hand you back the chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm not seeing any further hands. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Timmers that council receive and file the presentation by Matt Johnson, Urban Solutions Planning and Development Consultants, Inc., regarding the zoning bylaw amendment for Green Lane Road and Ontario Street. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Regima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Michalek?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Devan. So council committee, I'm wondering, we are almost 3.5 hours in. We do need to go to the report, but I'm wondering what the pleasure of the committee is, if we plow through this on the report and then have a break, or we take a break now. What's your pleasure? Those that would like to have a break now? Okay, I'm seeing a number of hands. So if we could maybe take, can we take 8 minutes and be back at 9:30? Thank you. Thank you so much.